Good morning, everyone. It's Jewel.
Hey, Jewel.
How you doing?
Good. I love your music. Oh, not that Jewel, sorry.
Well, I'll sing to you if you want.
Good morning, Jewel.
Good morning. So I messed with my Zoom trying to create background, and now when I turn it on, it's evil. It's kind of half background and half not.
All right, do we have a quorum? Tessa.
Thank you. Yes, I have 1, 2, 3.
I don't know if I
I
need
have
to.
6 confirmed by the names they've registered in that are Transportation Committee members. One alternate, Mayor Judy Ritter, Vice Chair Sankey, you, Councilmember Joe Mosta, Joanna, and Commissioner Benelli. So we do have 6 confirmed TC members right now.
Judy Ritter is here from North County, Inland.
Okay, good. So I guess we could have everybody please mute themselves if they're not talking. We're getting a lot of background noise. And do we want people to turn their cameras on only to speak? Is that right? For the bandwidth? I'm asking staff.
Chair, this is James. It's up to you. Individuals' bandwidths may be impacted, but the go to Zoom will be able to handle as many, up to 39 cameras.
Okay, well, if it starts getting wonky, we may have to ask people to turn off the cameras. Okay, all right, let's go ahead and start. Welcome to the July 17th Sandag Transportation Committee meeting. Let's start with the Pledge of Allegiance. If you could please join me in the pledge. All right, ready?
To the flag.
Again.
Pledge
To the
allegiance
flag.
to the flag.
The United
United States of America and to the republic for which it stands,
Republic,
one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice.
God, liberty and justice for all. All right, we're going to have to practice that. Okay, so I would just want to confirm once again before we jump to the meeting from the clerk, do we have a quorum?
Thank you, Chair. You do have a quorum for this meeting.
Okay, so I got just a little script I got here. I want to update the members and public on our new process for both member and public comments. The primary members of this committee will be using their cameras and will take live public comments. Members are asked to turn on their cameras when they have a comment or question, and so I can see that and recognize you. I'm going to ask our legal counsel, Amber Lynn, to provide a quick reminder on how the public comments will work. Amber Lynn, if you could take it away, please.
Thank you, Chair Desmond. As noted on the cover page of today's meeting agenda, in addition to emailed comments, the public may also provide live comments. In order to provide live comments, you may join today's Zoom or by using your phone using the numbers that are provided on the cover page of today's meeting agenda. When public comments are called for on an item, please click on the raise hand icon in the Zoom toolbar, which is on the top right of the screen. The chair will call on you by the name provided. If you are participating by telephone, please press star 9 on your telephone and raise your hand to indicate your desire to speak. The chair will call on you by the last 3 of your telephone number. The organizer will ask you to unmute when you are called on. The instructions for providing live comments are also on the bottom of the cover page of today's agenda, which can be accessed from the homepage of Sandag's website at www.sandag.org. All comments, whether they are emailed or live, will be part of today's meeting record.
Okay, thank you, Amber Lynn. And we're still getting some echo, so if you've got your mics on, not speaking, please turn them off. So, let's see. So everything sounds good. So let's go ahead and start with item number 1. This is the approval of the meeting minutes from, let's see, our last meeting. Do we have any No, actually, it's not. I apologize. Item number 1 today is public comments. Do we have any public comments or any speakers that want to weigh in on public comments that are not agendized today? I don't see any
Chair,
raised.
I do not see any raised hands.
Okay, I don't either. Okay, any committee members haven't made any comments on things not on today's agenda? Okay, well, hearing none, we'll move on to item 2. Item 2 is the executive director's report. With the executive director's report is going to be held during our joint meeting at 10 o'clock, and that's going to be with the border committees and the regional planning committee. So, so that's when Hassan's going to be giving his report. So we're not going to have an item 2. Item 3, this is the approval of the minutes from our June 19th meeting. If there's any comments or a motion.
Move approval of the minutes, Benelli.
Second approval of the minutes, Sankey.
All right, any other discussion? Or okay, let's go ahead. We have a motion by committee member Benelli and a second by Sankey. Do we have any, do a roll call vote, please?
Chair Desmond, the minutes are actually under the consent calendar. Can we confirm with the motion maker and second whether they're approving the entire consent calendar or just the minutes, and the other 2 items will be taken separately?
I'm fine with that. Sorry, I didn't realize moving things around here. Personally, I would like to pull item 5. I have questions on item 5, but if there's, I don't know if Mr. Benelli, are you okay with approving the entire consent or except for item 5?
I am, except I have a question on item 4.
Okay. So we're back
As a seconder of the motion, I'm fine with the removal of 5 from the consent agenda. The motion stands approving the others, and I certainly encourage Admiral Benelli's question to be addressed before we vote.
Okay, Mr. Benelli, go ahead with item 4.
The question is on the environmental mitigation program for the Transnet program. Are we still of the opinion, and staff can get back to me on this if they have to, that the environmental mitigation program as we go forward now is just monitoring and managing? We're not acquiring any new land.
This is Kim Smith. Good morning, Transportation Committee. Yes, we are moving forward with monitoring and management, and most of our acquisitions are large acquisitions for transportation related mitigation have been conducted already. So, yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, so we have a motion for items 3 and 4 in consent. I've got to pull item 5. I'm voting that separately. All right, then let's do a roll call for consent items 3 and 4.
Thank you, Chair. San Diego County Regional Airport Authority, Joanna Schiavone.
Schiavone, yes.
City of San Diego, Councilmember Monica Montgomery. She was trying to log in, so I will come back to her. County of San Diego, Chair Jim Desmond.
Yes, and I guess before we finalize this, I forgot to ask if there's any members of the public that wanted to comment on either of those 2 items.
Thank you. I did not see any hands raised for either, for any item on consent agenda.
Okay, yes, thanks.
East County, Councilmember Bill Baber. And actually, Councilmember Mendoza is present for East County. If we could promote her so she could vote on this item.
Yeah, if she's the alternate, the primary's not here, sure.
Production, and I'll come back to East County. MTS, Mayor Alejandro Sotelo Solis.
Sotelo Solis, aye.
North County Coastal, Mayor Jewel Edson.
Jewel Edson, aye.
North County Inland, Mayor Paul McNamara. I believe Mayor Judy Ritter is present for North County Inland.
Ritter, aye.
North County Transit District, Deputy Mayor Jack Feller.
Yes.
Port of San Diego, Commissioner Gary Benelli.
Benelli, yes.
South County, Vice Chair Bill Sankey.
Sankey, yes.
Now I'd like to go back to East County, Councilmember Jennifer Mendoza. I see she's still under the attendee side. Unfortunately, maybe we can't promote her, so I'll mark East County as absent unless she can indicate in the chat what the vote is for East County. And City of San Diego, Monica Montgomery, Councilmember Monica Montgomery. City of San Diego is absent. That motion passes with those members present.
Okay. All right, thank you very much. I do see in the chat if there's a way we can mute the a question on the background noises that are coming from, I guess, the host lines from Johanna Schiavone. Just to kind of reduce some of the echo if possible.
Can you hear me now? This is Councilmember Mendoza.
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay, I vote aye.
Thank you, Councilmember. We will change the record to reflect East County voted aye on the consent agenda.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Moving on to item 5. These are the ones that I have questioned. I need more clarification on. And there is a revision on item 5, I guess, in the on the front page. There's a revision that I just got this morning, where the action item is where it says action requesting approval, and it says which is continued upon the approval of commercial paper agreements, and item 8A and 8B, and I guess that's been removed. Is that true, staff?
Yes, that's true. That's not necessary because this is a draft amendment, so legal counsel advised to remove it.
Okay, so that's the first order of business. On item 5, there's a few items on here that I would like more clarification on or explanation. And if we could do it at, because I understand what we're doing in this motion is sending this out for a 30-day public comment period. We have another TC meeting in August. If we could get an update at that meeting on attachment 2 in this item 5, there's a few road lane improvements and also to the Grand Central Station. And specifically on item attachment 2, if everybody wants to follow along, page 55, Cal 09D is in Delta. This is converting HOV lanes to express lanes. If we could get a presentation at our next board meeting, or next TC meeting, on what express lanes are and what they are and what they aren't, because that explanation is not very clear here in the agenda. Also, on the next page, the Cal 536 and 538, SR 52 and 67 improvements. What I'm looking for is like a paragraph of what exactly these are, a little more in depth with a map showing what those are. And then also on the Cal 572, the I-5 transit priority lane. I just think we sometimes approve these items in this budget process. And in my mind, I'd like to get a little more clarification. So if we could get the clarification on those items, along with the Central Mobility Station, which is SAN 258 in that same attachment. We're proposed to spend $34 million, I guess, this year on the Grand Central Station and engineering and preliminary work. And I just want a little more information on those items, and that item as well. So I'm not looking for a huge long presentation, but just more clarifications instead of these one-line explanations of what they are. And I do see them in attachment 3, but it's still very cursory. So that's what I'm going to be requesting from staff. Are you going to have enough time to do that and give us a little more in depth on those items for item 5?
Mr. Chairman, this is Ray Traynor. I'm sitting in for Hassan Akrada, the Executive Director this morning. So yes, received your questions. The next meeting in August, excuse me, is a really packed agenda. So if I may, we do have staff available this morning on the meeting. Perhaps we could try to address your questions now. Would that be acceptable to you and the members of the committee?
How about just make them brief and brilliant at the next one?
Okay, we'll go ahead and prepare just a real brief response then, sir. Thank you.
I'm looking for a map and a paragraph of, explanation of express lanes, explanation of improvements, priority lanes, and then what at Grand Central, what the $34 million is going towards. So, thank you. So I'll go ahead and move approval of item 5 unless there's any other questions or comments. With those clarifications. So this is going, so they won't change it, but I'm ready to vote for it, but just want the more discussion because apparently this is coming back in 30 days.
I'll second.
Okay. Any other discussion? All right, if we could have a roll call vote, please.
Thank you, Chair. And I'd like to state for the record that it was Deputy Mayor Feller that seconded the motion on item number 5.
And here, also, is there any public comment on item 5?
Thank you. I was going to say I don't see any hands raised on this item.
All right, thank you.
San Diego County Regional Airport Authority, Joanna Schiavone.
Tony, aye.
City of San Diego, Councilmember Monica Montgomery. I believe she is still attempting to log in, but is not present at this time. County of San Diego, Chair Jim Desmond.
Desmond, aye.
East County, Councilmember Jennifer Mendoza.
Aye.
MTS, Mayor Alejandro Sotelo Solis.
Sotelo Solis, aye.
North County Coastal, Mayor Jewel Edson.
Edson, aye.
North County Inland, Mayor Judy Ritter.
Ritter, aye.
North County Transit District, Deputy Mayor Jack Feller.
Yes.
Port of San Diego, Commissioner Benelli.
Benelli, yes.
South County Vice Chair Bill Sankey.
Sankey, yes.
That item passes unanimously with those members present.
Okay, thank you very much. Moving on to the reports, item number 6 is the 2020 Coordinated Plan Public Hearing. We have a report from Lisa Madsen. Lisa.
Good morning. I had a PowerPoint. There we go. Okay, good morning. At the June 19th Transportation Committee meeting, the committee released the draft 2020 Coordinated Plan for public review. It provides a 5-year blueprint for the implementation of the transit and specialized transportation concepts described in San Diego Forward, the regional plan. This plan is the 9th edition of the Coordinated Plan. The Coordinated Plans are required under the Federal FAST Act to distribute Section 5310 funds and locally under Transnet to distribute senior mini grants, both of which fund specialized transportation projects for seniors and persons with disabilities. To date, the 5310 program has awarded $11.6 million and the senior mini grant program has awarded $17.7 million in funds over the course of each program to provide transportation solutions to seniors and persons with disabilities. The coordinated plan is unique in that it combines the regional requirement for a short-range transit plan with the federal requirement for a coordinated plan into one concise planning document. Additionally, the combination of transit and social service transportation provides an opportunity to evaluate all available transportation services in the region. Next slide, please. Along with the evaluation of transportation services, the coordinated plan establishes a unified regional strategy to provide transportation to the most sensitive population groups in the county, including seniors.
I mean, we're screwed. We're down 10 million a year. Okay, and the guys just doing this mantra of, well, no new taxes.
Whoever hasn't muted, you're bleeding onto the webinar. Please mute yourself.
Because it's like you close a firehouse, what happens? Your fire insurance goes up because you're now further away from the fire. Anyway.
Yeah, maybe Mayor McNamara.
Paul McNamara.
Gone ahead and muted him, Chair.
Okay, no worries. While there's currently a range of transportation services available to these population groups, gaps in service remain due to geography, limitations in transit service, funding constraints, eligibility, knowledge, and training. However, the availability of funding programs specifically tied to the coordinated plan enables SANDAG to help put strategies into action to help meet the identified unmet transportation needs of these population groups. Next slide, please. Our specialized transportation grantees use the assessment, strategies, and priorities included in chapters 4 through 6 to craft their specialized transportation grant applications for section 5310 and senior mini grants, which Zach will cover in item 7 later this morning. These grants are then used to purchase vehicles and provide transportation to seniors and persons with disabilities. So next slide, please. Thank you. Staff conducted extensive outreach with current grantees, the public, and stakeholders during the past year and incorporated many of those comments and suggestions into the draft and final reports. Since the opening of the public comment period at the June TC meeting, we have not received any additional public comments. So the Transportation Committee is asked to 1, conduct a public hearing on the proposed 2020 coordinated plan, and 2, after considering public comments, adopt resolution number 2021-01, or attachment 1, approving the proposed final 2020 coordinated plan in substantially the same form as available online at sandag.org/coordinatedplan. That concludes my presentation, and I would be happy to answer any questions.
Do you have any questions from the any committee members? Comments? Tessa, do we have any public comment on the item?
I do not see any hands raised for the public, but I do see Deputy Mayor Feller raising his hand.
Oh, okay. Deputy Mayor Feller. Yeah.
Thank you. Pardon me. I think this is the success of a project we did in 2002 at SANDAG, and I want to commend staff for keeping it going. This was Phil Monroe over from Coronado and myself and a couple of other people were on a committee, and this has really improved substantially the services to the seniors. So I'm going to move approval.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you very much for your efforts and the motion. Is there a second?
Mayor Sotelo, second.
Okay, I think I heard Mayor Sotelo Solis with a second. There's many people there, but and is there any other discussion or speakers?
Mayor Desmond?
Yes.
You need to officially open the public hearing and then call for public comment.
Oh, okay. I'll officially open the public hearing. So is there any public comments?
Thank you, Chair. I do not see any hands raised at this time.
Okay, then I'll close the public hearing. All right, so we're back to, we have a motion and a second for this item. So is this basically well, this is to have the public hearing and adopt. So we have a motion and a second. We have a roll call vote, please.
Thank you. San Diego County Regional Airport Authority, Joanna Schiavone.
Schiavone, yes.
City of San Diego, Councilmember Monica Montgomery. Still do not see the City of San Diego present. County of San Diego, Chair Jim Desmond.
Desmond, yes.
East County, Councilmember Jennifer Mendoza.
Aye.
Metropolitan Transit System, Mayor Alejandro Sotelo Solis.
Sotelo Solis, aye.
North County Coastal, Mayor Jewel Edson.
Edson, aye.
North County Inland, Mayor Paul McNamara.
McNamara, aye.
North County Transit District, Deputy Mayor Jack Feller.
Feller, yes.
Port of San Diego, Commissioner Gary Vanelli.
Benelli, yes.
South County Vice Chair Bill Sankey.
Sankey, yes, and Jack Feller, thanks so very much for highlighting Phil Monroe's. He's still involved in fact and a great council member from Coronado. Thank you.
Thank you. That item passes unanimously with those members present.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone. We're going to go ahead and move on to item 7. This is a specialized transportation grant, cycle 11, call for projects, evaluation criteria. We have Zachary Rivera and Brian Lane to give us a presentation. Take it away.
Great. Thank you so much. And good morning, Chair and committee members. My name is Zachary Rivera, and I help to oversee the administration of the Transnet Senior Mini Grant Program and Federal Section 5310 program, which jointly comprise the Specialized Transportation Grant Program, or STGP. Today, I'm presenting proposed changes to eligibility and evaluation criteria for the Cycle 11 STGP call for projects. Next slide. The Transportation Committee recommended on July 20th, 2018, and the Board of Directors approved on July 27th, 2018, the STGP program goal and objectives, which provide context for the proposed changes to Cycle 11. The program goal is to, quote, improve mobility for seniors and individuals with disabilities throughout the region by removing barriers to transportation services, expanding transportation mobility options, and providing transportation services that meet the special needs of seniors and individuals with disabilities. Next slide, please. There are also 4 program objectives. They strive to 1, fund projects that are derived from the coordinated plan, which we just heard from in the prior item. 2, fund innovative and flexible programs. 3, provide incentives for the coordination among specialized transportation providers. And 4, encourage cost-efficient service provision. Next slide, please. Based on the program goal and objectives, the Transportation Committee approved these 8 evaluation criteria categories and relative point weights during the Cycle 10 call for projects. No adjustments to the evaluation criteria, categories, and points are proposed for the Cycle 11 call for projects. Staff are, however, proposing a few modifications for Cycle 11. They are detailed in attachment 1 of the staff report, and I will summarize them today. Next slide. In 2011, the Transportation Committee approved minimum and maximum grant request amounts for the Specialized Transportation Grant Program, which have not been modified since. For Cycle 11, staff proposes increasing the maximum total grant request per project from $200,000 to $250,000 per year per funding source. Staff also proposes increasing the maximum grant request per applying agency from $500,000 to $600,000 per year per funding source. These changes seek to both encourage a bigger bang for the buck and also reduce duplicative services. No other changes to the eligibility criteria proposed. Next slide. Second, to better reflect current trend in specialized transportation service delivery, staff proposes updating the one-way passenger trip and cost per service hour performance indicators. Next slide. Next slide, please. Great. Third, due to COVID-19, staff proposes modifying the seat utilization rate performance indicator to allow for more flexibility. The proposed change seeks to balance the need for service delivery with the recognition that physical distancing requirements or recommendations may prohibit or hinder use of shared trips, especially for seniors and individuals with disabilities. Next slide. Staff also proposes altering the methodology for calculating past performance adjustments so that they tie more to the performance of individual projects by project type and more accurately measure a grantee's actual performance. Currently, if an applicant has held multiple specialized transportation grants from SANDAG in the past 3 years, staff calculates an average of the performance scores such that each applicant has one past performance adjustment applied to all proposed projects, irrespective of project type or level of funding. With the proposed change, staff could calculate multiple performance adjustments based on project type and level of funding. Next slide. Lastly, to not penalize grantees for reduced service caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, staff proposes an additional modification to the past performance adjustment methodology as stated in attachment 2 of the staff report. No past performance adjustment would be applied for projects that started on or after March 1st due to the stay-at-home order. That concludes this portion of the presentation, and I'll now turn it over to my colleague Brian to discuss another staff proposal.
Okay, good morning. Next slide, please. I'm Brian Lane. I'm a senior transit planner working with Zach on the Cycle 11, and I'd like to talk about the Consolidated Transportation Services Agency staff proposal to dedicate partial of the funding. As a reminder, our CTSA was designated by SANDAG in 2006, and we chose FACT to be that CTSA, and that's a state mandated requirement. FACT receives about $132,000 a year in those state TDA funds, and that's their only dedicated source of funding. Those CTSA activities are key to the STGP goals and objectives that Zach talked about previously, and those goals and objectives and CTSA requirements are reflected in their current contract that we have with them. We recently amended a year or two ago that the Transportation Committee approved, adding performance measures and refining those, that scope of work. The state TDA has a requirement to do a triennial performance audit, and our auditors in the last audit had a recommendation that SANDAG and FACT should work together to identify and pursue additional funding sources to support their activities as the CTSA. And they also noted that the primary challenge facing FACT is a long-term sustainable funding solution that would let them go beyond just planning a year out at a time and get multiple years out and start working more with SANDAG and the county to work on long-term specialized transportation planning and their efforts. Next slide. So staff today is proposing to dedicate 25% of the senior mini grant and 5310 mobility funds to FACT before opening the competitive call for projects. So that would total about 1.8 million for cycle 11. Those 4 numbers for each year for each program are shown in the middle of the slide. Just as a reminder, in the last cycle, FACT was awarded through the competition about 1.2 million in mobility management projects that they've been working on since. So this does reflect that increase that the TDA auditors were recommending. Next slide. So with this dedicated funding, we would reduce the amount that FACT could apply for the other grantees from the $600,000 a year that Zach's proposing to $200,000 a year, to $200,000 a year. So FACT was successful 64% of STGP funds would still be awarded and available to all the other grantees. With that dedication of funding, we would amend the contract with FACT, working with our legal staff and planning staff and their board to expand the required functions in their scope of work, add performance measures, would tie in those additional functions, and we would come back to the Transportation Committee to have that scope amendment approved, and then we would come annually with those performance measures to show how FACT is doing. So, the whole plan with this is to increase countywide coordination efforts with other jurisdictions and social service agencies. With this dedication to funding, CTSA and FACT could work much better with all the cities and jurisdictions and transit agencies on improving coordination, hopefully, getting that bigger bang for the buck that we're trying to look for with the specialized grant program. And so with that, I'll turn it back to Zach to talk about it, and thanks for your time.
Great, thank you, Brian. Can we go to the next slide, please? Lastly, here is the anticipated timeline for the Cycle 11 call for projects. Staff presented this item to the Social Services Transportation Advisory Council at its May 11th meeting, and the Independent Taxpayer and the Taxpayer Oversight Committee at its July 8th meeting. Both the STAC and IPOC did not propose any refinements to staff's proposals. Based on this timeline, staff would present draft funding recommendations to the ITOC, the Transportation Committee, and Board of Directors between January and March. Pending approval, successful projects could start between July and October of 2021. We can go to the next slide, please. So therefore, the Transportation Committee is asked to recommend that the Board of Directors approve 1, proposed revisions to the eligibility and evaluation criteria for the Cycle 11 Specialized Transportation Grant Program call for projects. And then 2, a proposed allocation of 25% of STGP Cycle 11 available funding to the Consolidated Transportation Service Agency for mobility management activities, and a reduction of the maximum grant request for other CTSA proposed projects to $200,000 per year per funding source. This concludes our presentation, and we welcome any questions and input you may have at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Zach and Brian. Appreciate it. I do see Mr. Sankey has a question or comment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And Brian and Zach, thanks for the report. We've talked about this offline a little bit, and one of my concerns about the dedicated 25% was that the other major grant recipients over time are aware and are supportive of this. And I know that we're going to hear from some members of the public as well, but either Zach or Brian, what kind of outreach did you do with the other major grant recipients, and in terms of having this dedicated 25% sort of come off the top for FACT is from my position a great idea, because they are our official CTSA. But I want to make sure that the other grantees who have historically benefited from this program understand the importance of it and are supportive.
Right. So we did bring this up at our Social Services Transportation Advisory Council, and on that council are many of our big grantees. We talked about it then and encouraged, feedback at that meeting. Didn't get much at that meeting, but we did encourage them to email and talk to us. And we did get a couple of emails with just some follow-up questions, and from some of our biggest grantees, and they seemed happy with those answers. We also hold a weekly Council on Access and Mobility meeting at this time during COVID, just to have all of the grantees and other specialized providers kind of talk to each other about what's going on, and we brought it up there as well. And then we did have a couple phone calls directly with a couple grantees just to run it by them, see how they felt. And again, didn't hear any major complaints. They were just trying to get some of the facts, and did have a great understanding of the proposal from staff.
Thanks, Brian. That's my question for now. And when it's time, I'd be happy to appropriately make a motion for that. But I know there's some other speakers. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I see we have one member of the public, but also I see Mayor Edson has her hand raised. Mayor Edson.
Thank you. I am a member of the FACT board. I was appointed by Transportation Committee to serve on FACT a couple of years ago. And FACT does an amazing job. I definitely support this and would make a motion myself or second the motion by Mr. Sankey. FACT assists San Diego residents with overcoming barriers to mobility to achieve independence. That's so important for our community. As a nonprofit formed in 2005 to improve access to transportation for seniors, persons to disability, veterans, and the income disadvantaged, San Diego designated FACT, as was mentioned in the report, as a CTSA for San Diego County in 2006. So whether due to special needs, distance to and from transit routes, or gaps in existing services, when folks are unable to access public transportation, FACT is there to act as a mobility manager. And I think it's very important to provide a source of secure funding for them, which this will do. So for those reasons, and the fact that both the TDA auditor's recommendation and ITALC support, I believe that this is the way to go. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Mayor Edson, and thank you very much for serving on the FACT board and all the efforts there, so in being our representative.
It's been my pleasure.
I don't see any other committee hands up. I see we have Stuart Halpern, I'm sorry, Stuart Halpern is here, wishes to speak from the public. Do you see that also, Tessa, or hopefully get it?
I do, yes, he had his hand raised. It's down now. If production could please unmute Stuart Halpern.
Stuart, you are self-muted.
Is his hand down?
You're still muted.
Yes, his hand is down now, but I'm not sure if he put it down or if our team did, Chair Desmond.
Okay.
I do not see any other hands raised at this time, though.
I can't get through. I can't get my video working.
Well, your audio is working very well, Jack Feller.
May I speak?
Yes, please.
Thank you. I believe in the early years, there wasn't $200,000 to go around to the whole community. So this is a big step into improve what FACT is doing for all of our communities. It's just amazing. So I'll leave the first and second to whoever is doing that, but those are my comments. Thanks.
Do you want to? All right. Do you want to make the motion yourself? Since
Mr. Chair, I would like to make the motion if that's okay. I'd make it on behalf of Phil Monroe of course it's me, but I want to recognize Phil for the work he's done on behalf of not just our community, but our region on this important topic.
Okay, so we have a motion. Mr. Feller, do you want to second that?
I asked to second that motion, actually. Jewel Edson.
Okay, Jewel.
Yes,
That was the
thank
first
you.
time we had some elbowing going on at the making a motion. Okay, that's good. I appreciate it. And appropriate. All right. Did we get a hold of Mr. Halpern or not, Tessa?
Stuart is a member of ITALC, by the way, there, Mr. Chair.
And our audit
Okay.
committee as well. Yes.
Okay. Well, I think Jewel did a good job of representing them, and along with Mr. Feller and Phil Monroe. So, is there any other public comments on this item?
I see no further hands raised at this time, Chair.
All right, if there's no further discussion, we have a motion by, yes, go ahead.
Chair, I'm sorry, just real quick. I'm fully supportive of this. There is no time like the present to make sure that, you know, we are in fact with the necessary resources right now. I do have a quick question about long-term sustainable funding. And the audit did also kind of allude to this and point this out. And so I wanted to know if we had any discussions around diversifying, I guess, or looking at several different ways to continue to fund this as the need grows.
Does staff want to, Ryan or Brian, or I'm sorry, Brian or Zachary, you have any input?
Maybe I'll jump in that, yeah, I mean, we always get more than double the amount of applications than we have money for. So we realize there's a big need for this around the county. Through our coordinated plan in the item previously, we really try to look at where all the gaps are around the county and ensure that we're identifying them. And you know, and through the plan, we do a low income, a minority, and seniors, and an individual with disability check to make sure we're identifying where the big gaps are, and you know, compared with where transit is and where a lot of residents of those different communities live. So we identify those gaps, and then those are put into the very high category of the priorities for the region. And so when applicants apply for our cycles, they have to point to those priorities that we're meeting those gaps. So that's something we always do. And then, you know, the agencies always realize that we could use more funding for this. And in the last ballot measure that we proposed a couple of years ago, there was going to be, I think, like a 10-fold increase in the amount of funding that would go to these types of programs. So, you know, we're always looking for more money and hope we can get it through various means.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, well, thank you. If there's no other comments, gone. If we could have a roll call vote, please.
Thank you, Chair Desmond. On item number 7, San Diego County Regional Airport Authority, Joanna Schiavone.
Schiavone, yes.
City of San Diego, Councilmember Monica Montgomery.
Yes.
County of San Diego, Chair Jim Desmond.
Desmond, yes.
East County, Councilmember Bill Baber.
Yes.
Metropolitan Transit System, Mayor Alejandro Sotelo Solis.
Sotelo Solis, aye.
North County Coastal, Mayor Jewel Edson.
Edson, yes.
North County Inland, Mayor Paul McNamara.
McNamara, aye.
North County Transit District, Deputy Mayor Jack Feller.
Feller, yes.
Port of San Diego, Commissioner Gary Benelli.
Benelli, yes.
South County Vice Chair Bill Sandkey.
Sankey, yes.
Thank you. That item passes unanimously.
Sorry. Thank you very much, everyone. The next item, item 8, this is a memorandum of agreement. There's an 8A and an 8B on this particular item. They are both Transnet debt financing programs, which is why they are being held together here. So we're going to have this, that's why they're combined, 8A and B. So we have a presentation on 8A first by Dawn Batiste and Linda Culp.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, committee members and Chair Desmond. Today I'm here with Linda Culp and an 8B, Eric Minichilli from City of Imperial Beach, and we're going to be talking about requests to borrow commercial paper from the Transnet debt financing program. 8A is for a borrowing for the North County Transit District, and 8B will be for City of Imperial Beach. So the proposed memorandum of agreement for each agency is included as attachment A to your reports. The process leading up to today's presentation involves several steps. First, we look at the capacity of the commercial paper program, and currently there's about $28 million available for jurisdictions to borrow or draw. It is prudent to only increase this limit as needed because there's a fee for the credit regardless of whether it's drawn upon. The current commercial paper program is due to be renegotiated in 2021. It's a $100 million program now, and it provides an opportunity in 2021 to increase the line to accommodate future draws as necessary. Next, we look at the repayment capacity of the agencies that want to utilize the program. SANDAG Board Policy 31 allows for a 5-year repayment period with commencement of repayment beginning in year 3. We do the capacity analysis based on anticipated Transnet funds, such as the Transit System Improvement and Local Street Improvement programs, to determine if there's enough anticipated revenue in the expected repayment period to cover the debt and cost or fees related to the borrowing. Attachment 3 of the reports show the capacity analysis. Commercial paper is variable rate debt, so agencies have to cover the rate at the time the funds are borrowed and outstanding, plus some fees associated with the borrowing. So for the capacity analysis, we use a 2.5% rate, and that is generally a bit higher than the fees plus interest that have averaged in the past. And we do this just to be sure that the capacity does exist in case there is a downturn in revenue or an increase in interest cost. So getting back to SANDAG, Board Policy 31, it allows for a 5-year repayment period with commencement of repayment beginning in year 3. The typical repayment process makes priority first for the Transnet LSI or TSI funds, the repayment of the debt service. So in other words, when the Transnet funds are received at the state level and they remit them to us, it stops first with our trustee. And our trustee holds the funds required to repay the borrowing and then passes through the remainder of the funds that are available for agencies for their other program projects. So in the case of the NCTD project itself, the principal is going to be repaid with funds available to the Transnet Major Corridor Program rather than NCTD's TSI funds. And for this reason, an exception to the repayment rule is being requested so the project can be advanced while not jeopardizing other projects scheduled to receive major corridor funding. NCTD will bear the cost of the interest and fees, and in a moment, Linda will talk about the project, including the background on the funding. So moving on, attachment 2 of the report provides an eligibility check to be sure the projects qualify for use of the commercial paper. And then we also discuss the borrowing and bond with our bond counsel to assure that we're able to maintain the tax exempt status of the program. Next, we do require the City Council or Board to pass a resolution approving the execution of the Memorandum of Agreement. And then finally, we bring the item forward for consideration. And here we are today with this item for you. The Independent Taxpayer Oversight Committee discussed these items on July 8th and agreed that the benefits of accelerating the projects with commercial paper borrowing exceed the cost of waiting to accumulate the Transnet dollars over several years to fund the projects. And that is the ITAC's main focus under the ordinance. They did ask that we provide clarity on the principal repayment for the NCTD project, which will be borne by the Transnet Major Corridor Program. Pending outcome of today's action, this is scheduled for the July 24th board meeting. And Linda is now available to discuss the project itself.
Thank you, Dawn. Well, a little bit of background. Since 1995, NCTD has operated coaster commuter rail service between Oceanside and downtown San Diego, including 8 stops. And as Dawn mentioned, the coaster is a major corridor program project in Transnet, and there's 2 components to that. First is a capital program that includes adding additional double tracking, station improvements such as parking, and then vehicle procurement. And then the second component is service improvements, and that includes additional peak period, morning peak and afternoon peak period service, as well as off-peak services, for example, in the middle of the day or later at night. Over the past 12 years, SANDAG, with its partners, has designed and built more than 12 miles of double tracking. I'm very happy to announce that we just opened another 2.5 miles on Monday. And the ultimate goal there is to add passenger and freight rail services along the corridor. In part due to these improvements, for example, Amtrak has added recently 2 new round trips on the Pacific Surfliner service between San Diego and Los Angeles. Last September, the board of directors approved $58.8 million for 2 new coaster train sets, and that would include 2 locomotives, cab cars, and a number of coach cars that will be needed in order to add additional commuter rail service between Oceanside and downtown San Diego. And these funds are programmed beginning in FY 2024. NCTD plans to operate 30-minute a train every 30 minutes during the peak period, as well as a train every hour in the off-peak period. And per the MOA, this service increase is anticipated to begin either in October of 2022 or April of 2023, and the date depends on the delivery, the testing, and the inspection of the new train sets. NCTD has existing procurements for both locomotives and cars with options for the additional 2 train sets. And in order to take advantage of these current procurements, NCTD needs to advance payments prior to FY 2024. So at this point, I would like to turn over to Eric for the second part of the item.
Actually, Linda, I think, Chair Desmond, did you want to take both of the recommendations together? Or would you like to hear from Eric first?
Well, let me, is there any questions on this item for the NCTD transaction? Okay, I'll bite. Okay, so let me get, I'm trying to figure this out. So the normal way of these Transnet debt financing is we keep the payment, Sandag keeps the payment portion that's owed to them, and then gives the balance to the, I guess in this case, NCTD. So what part again can you say that some of the money's coming out of the money's coming out of the major corridor program versus NCTD, and how does that get paid back? I'm trying to follow the money is what I'm trying to do.
So Chair Desmond, most often when we see these commercial paper items, it is a local agency wanting to advance the, I'm trying to get, sorry. Thank you, James. I was trying to get my video back on. So most often it's a local agency wanting to advance their local street improvement funding. And then that funding is what will repay the borrowing and the principal and the interest and fees. In this case, NCTD is wanting to advance and take advantage of earlier funding for a program, for a project that is funded within the Sandag budget in our major corridor program. So they are not advancing a project that they funded exclusively with their transit system improvement funds. They're actually asking to be able to advance with commercial paper a project that is within the major corridor program. So the principal repayments will come from the major corridor program, but NCTD will fund the borrowing cost. And that will allow them to take advantage of their existing contract and earlier service to the public, rather than waiting till fiscal year 24 and 25 for the funds to be available.
Okay, thank you. I had to hear that twice to understand it, so I appreciate
it. This is not usually what you will see in these memorandum of agreement. So
they're borrowing major corridor program dollars is what they're doing, and paying interest on that as opposed to Transnet dollars that they're borrowing against, which makes sense in this economy here right now.
Yeah.
Okay, is there any other questions on 8B? Or I'm sorry, 8A. 8A. Okay, why don't we go ahead with 8B then? This is City Imperial Beach.
Yes, Eric, you're up.
Go on again.
Good morning, Chair and Committee. I'll be brief. I'm Eric Minichilli. I'm Imperial Beach Public Works Director. We're doing the more standard borrowing here. The city's requesting permission to utilize Sandag's debt financing instrument as a means to accelerate construction of interconnected traffic signal timing and controls on State Route 75. That's a very key corridor, runs through San Diego, Imperial Beach, and through Coronado, leads to all the naval bases, and experiences significant congestion during non-COVID times especially, but to all the Navy bases. So this is a project that Sandag has identified for funding out in the future, but we've got an opportunity to get it built quicker and a little more cheaply due to some neighboring construction that's going to be going on by San Diego Gas and Electric. So I'm available for questions.
All right, thanks, Eric. Do we have any questions from any of the some staff members? Or I'm sorry, committee members? Mr. Feller, I see you waving your hand. Can't hear you, Jack. Can't hear you, Jack.
How about that?
Much better.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Much the same thing as what we're trying to do is take advantage of a situation with the train sets early because it's probably going to be much more cost effective. So same as Imperial Beach. So I'll move approval.
I'm happy to read the recommendations if there are no other questions. I'll defer to the chair.
Is that, I just want to make clear that that's a motion for both 8A and 8B, Jack, Mr. Feller?
That's correct, yes.
Okay, yeah, if you can go ahead and read the recommendation. Thanks.
Okay, great. So the recommendation for item 8A is the Transportation Committee is asked to recommend that the Sandag Board of Directors, acting as the Regional Transportation Commission, one, authorize the Executive Director to execute a memorandum of agreement with the North County Transit District to issue $46 million in commercial paper through the Transnet Debt Financing Program. And two, approve a repayment period of up to 10 years. And the recommendation for item 8B is the Transportation Committee is asked to recommend that the Sandag Board of Directors, acting as the Regional Transportation Commission, authorize the Executive Director to execute a memorandum of agreement with the City of Imperial Beach to issue $600,000 in commercial paper through the Transnet Debt Financing Program. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Do we have any other committee member comments? I don't see any. How about public comments on this item?
Chair Desmond, I do see Mayor Edson's hand raised, and I do not see any public comments for 8A or B.
Okay, Mayor Edson.
Yes, I would second that motion for both 8A and 8B.
All right, thank you. All right, and having no public speakers, let's go ahead and take a roll call vote.
Thank you, Chair Desmond. For items 8A and 8B, San Diego County Regional Airport Authority, Joanna Schiavone.
Schiavone, yes.
City of San Diego, Councilmember Monica Montgomery.
Yes.
County of San Diego, Chair Jim Desmond.
Desmond, yes.
East County, Councilmember Bill Baber.
Bill Baber, yes.
Metropolitan Transit System, Mayor Alejandro Sotelo Solis.
Sotelo Solis, aye.
North County Coastal, Mayor Jewel Edson.
Edson, yes.
North County Inland, Mayor Paul McNamara.
McNamara, yes.
North County Transit District, Deputy Mayor Jack Feller.
Feller, yes.
Port of San Diego, Commissioner Gary Benelli.
Benelli, yes.
South County Vice Chair Bill Sankey.
Sankey, yes.
Thank you. That item passes unanimously.
All right, thank you, Tessa. Moving on, next item is continued public comments. Do we have any other comments?
Thank you, Chair. I see no hands raised at this time.
Okay, thank you. Our next meeting is Friday, August 7th. Actually, our next meeting is in 25 minutes. At the joint meeting with the Borders Committee and Regional Planning Committee. And then there'll be a Transportation Committee. Our next is scheduled for August 7th. Thanks everybody for being here this morning, starting early so we could make sure we make our 10 o'clock meeting, and we'll see you all at 25 minutes.
Hey,
All
quick
right, thank you
question.
very much.
Quick question for production. Is it the same Zoom link that we're on now, or is there a different link for the 10 o'clock meeting?
It's the exact same link.
Thanks very much for keeping it simple for us tech savvy elected officials.
You're
right.
welcome.
Good question.
Vice Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, meeting's adjourned.
With you that you have quorums for all 3 committees at this time.
Okay, so I can convene the meeting now?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. So
And we
welcome
are
to
now starting recording again, just to let you know, Mayor.
Okay, right now?
Yep.
Okay, great. Well, let's see, hold on a minute. Okay, well, welcome everybody. Welcome to the first joint meeting of the Transportation Regional Planning and the Borders Committee. And it's a first for us because of the COVID pandemic. So I'm Mary Salas, the chair of the Regional Planning Committee and the mayor of the city of Chula Vista. And I'll be serving as chair for this joint meeting this morning. And first of all, I'd like to share that we will be hosting simultaneous translation in Spanish of this meeting. And I want to introduce our translator with Spanish language instructions. Esta junta es disponible en español. Nuestro traductor les dará las instrucciones para escuchar. Esta junta es en español. So can we introduce the translator?
Yes, good morning. My name is Carlos, and I will be serving as your interpreter this morning. I will now give the instructions in Spanish for the people that want to use the interpretation. Muy buenos días. Como ya se indicó, esta sesión está disponible en español a través de interpretación simultánea por parte de su servidor, Carlos. Para hacer uso del servicio de interpretación, en cuanto se habilite, que va a ser en unos minutos, tendría que desplazarse al fondo de la pantalla de Zoom, donde aparecen los controles para su micrófono, video, chat, etc. Y ahí va a aparecer un icono que parece un mundo, y es el icono de interpretación. Hace clic en ese icono y selecciona el idioma español. Además, tiene la opción de escuchar de fondo el original en inglés, o si no desea escucharlo, puede seleccionar Mute Original Audio y con eso ya solo escucharía la interpretación sin el inglés de fondo. Gracias. And that concludes my message. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And before we get started with the meeting, I would like to ask the chairs of the Transportation Committee and the Boards Committee to make some opening remarks should they wish to do so. So today, Chair Serge Dedina will not be with us, but Vice Chair Supervisor of Imperial County, Jesus Escobar, will be there in his stead. So Supervisor Desmond, do you have any opening comments?
Not really, Mary, but thank you very much for doing this, and I guess having this joint meeting here is pretty special. I just want to let you know, transportation, we've been working already. We met at 8:30 this morning and just finished up about 25 minutes ago, and are here ready to go again. So thank you very much for
Pulling double duty.
Yes.
Vice Chair Escobedo, do you have any comments?
Thank you. Good morning. First of all, I'm honored to be here as a representative of Imperial County. I'm honored to be a part of SANDAG. I do have a small business in San Diego County, so I definitely feel part of you. We're obviously living in unprecedented times. COVID-19 has adversely affected our personal life, our professional lives, our pocketbooks, and obviously our health. I wanted to acknowledge San Diego because coming from Imperial County, we have an underserved health community. We only have 2 hospitals with limited capacity and staffing, and San Diego County has really assisted us from a public health, personal health perspective, and I really wanted to acknowledge that as we go over this COVID-19 situation, the pandemic, and I'm very interested in listening to the panelists, and at the same time, not just acknowledge San Diego, but acknowledge essential workers. From Imperial County, I know there's numerous essential workers that come from San Diego County, that come from Mexico, Riverside County. And I know from San Diego County's perspective, there's numerous essential workers that come from Mexico, Orange County, and obviously Western Riverside County. So again, their acknowledgement is important.
Yes.
All right. Go ahead and bring your laptop to this and all the way up, and I'll be.
And on that, I appreciate being part of this board as vice chair. I'm going to miss Serge Dedina, but I'll try to do my best as vice chair. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. Next, I would like to ask our clerk to confirm that we have a quorum. Tessa, do we have a quorum?
Thank you, Chair Salas. We have a quorum for all 3 committees at this time.
Okay, thank you very much. And I'd like to update the committee members and the public on our new process for both member and public comments. The primary members will be using their cameras, and we will take live public comments. The committee members are asked to turn on their cameras when they have a comment or a question, and then I will recognize you. I'll ask now our legal counsel to provide a quick reminder on how the public comments will work. So please, Amberlynn.
Thank you, Mayor Salas. As noted on the cover of today's meeting agenda, in addition to emailed comments, the public may also provide live comments during the meeting. In order to provide live comments, you can join today's Zoom meeting through the link or by dialing the number from your phone that is provided on the cover page of today's meeting agenda. When public comments are called for on an item, please click on the raise hand icon in the Zoom toolbar on the right side of the screen. The chair will call on you by the name you have provided. If you are participating by telephone, please press *9 on your phone, which will raise your hand to indicate your desire to speak. The chair will call on you by the last 3 digits of your telephone number. The organizers will ask you to unmute when you are called on. The instructions for providing live comments are also on the bottom of the cover page of today's meeting agenda, which can be accessed from the home page of SANDAG's website at www.sandag.org. All comments, whether they are emailed or live, will be made part of today's meeting record. Thank you, Mayor Salas.
Okay, thank you very much. With that, we'll move on to item number 1, and that's the public and member comments. So I am asking members of the public who wish to offer public comment not related to a matter on today's agenda to please raise your hand at this time so we can call on you. Are there any of the members that want to make comments on an item not on the agenda today? Okay, seeing none, are there any committee members that wish to make a comment on an item not on the agenda today?
My apologies, Chair Salas. I misunderstood your original. There are no public hands raised at this time.
Okay, thank you. And now, members of the committee, are there any wishing to speak at this time? Okay, seeing none, it's my understanding that the Council General of Mexico would like to make a few remarks. Mr. Honorable Council General, are you there?
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Chair, Mayor Mary Salas. It's really a pleasure for us and an honor to participate in this joint session of the 3 committees. As you know, Madam Chair, members, COVID-19 pandemic has impacted all borders across the globe, and our border region is no exception. Land border crossings between Mexico and the United States remain temporarily restricted to prioritize essential travel until August 21st. However, both countries have been sensible to their economic integration, and cross-border trade hasn't been interrupted. COVID-19, at the risk of saying the obvious, knows no border. For a truly binational approach, we must work together on the public health and economic effects of the virus in this binational region. That is why cooperation in forums such as SANDAG are essential for an open dialogue in our region's best interests. And that is why I would like to congratulate Supervisor Cox for his initiative to explore the possibility of testing at San Isidro and other points of entry on this side on the border. In fact, I would like to take this opportunity to propose a binational project to provide a more accurate picture of COVID-19 cases in Baja California through the application of systematic testing among a representative sample of the population. We are in talks with Supervisor Cox, his office, and the Agency of Public Health of the county with Nick McKeowney, Will Magwood, Dr. McDonald. We hope to report to you good news in the near future. We believe that an effort such as this one will engage public and private sector stakeholders on both sides of the border, will utilize the project's results as an additional tool for policymakers on both sides of the border. Cross-border integration, Madam Chair, is inevitable, and how binational collaboration how can we work on a binational collaboration model is the best way forward in the midst of this crisis. Thank you very much for the opportunity, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, and it was great seeing you as always. And hopefully this pandemic will end and we'll get to be reunited in person. So with that, I'm going to move on to item number 2, and that's the Executive Director's Report. Mr. Igrado, would you like to provide a report to the committee members?
Good morning, Chair Salas. This is Ray Trainer, your Chief Planning Innovation Officer. I'm sitting in for your Executive Director, Hassan Akrada. He's at a speaking engagement this morning and apologizes that he cannot be here at this historic meeting. So I'd like to thank you, Chair Salas, Chair Desmond, and Vice Chair Escobar for the opportunity just to present the Executive Director's report. And I wanted to present some news on the legislative front that you would, I think, be very interested to know that we met with members of the legislature, and also Hassan joined with his colleagues, the various executive directors of the other regional agencies at the state, and they met with the governor's office and the director of the Housing and Community Development Department, Gustavo Velasquez, to discuss the delay of the housing elements that the board had signed on to a letter a few weeks ago. And I want to just report that there is some reluctance to granting that delay, and that's particularly because of the governor's focus on housing and development. But the administration is interested in learning more about how they can help the region with respect to completing the housing elements on the current schedule that's required. On the federal side, on the legislative front, the Senate is expected to release a coronavirus relief package next week, and so we're continuing to track whether that actually includes some transit funding or if funding is included for the state level or even the local agencies and our tribal nations as well. We had a successful working group meeting this week for the Low Sand Corridor. That's the group that's been organized by Secretary Kim at the state level. And this was attended by several members of our region, and we want to be able to just acknowledge that work continues to bring focus to the bluffs and providing funding for that. And one of the things that we learned also related to the Del Mar Bluffs is that the Army Corps of Engineers received news from the House at the federal level through the Water Resources Development Act, and this is going to enable them to conduct some feasibility studies looking at the bluff stabilization. And so they're looking to provide actually funding for that work, but we're excited to know that that's actually made it onto the Army Corps' list of projects to be able to work on. And also we were able to include an amendment carried by Representative Peters and Levin in the House's infrastructure bill, which is moving forward on that front. More locally here as well, related to the Low Sand Corridor, we're really excited because last week we celebrated a big milestone, and that's the achievement of the completion of the construction on the Low Sand double track of the Elvira to Morena project. It's about a little over 2.5 miles long of double track in a really complicated area up by Balboa Avenue, just north of State Route 52. And the project came in at a total about of $192 million, so it's a real significant step forward for our region as we continue to enhance rail performance on the Low Sand Rail. And just to conclude, we've received notice of a number of awards that I thought would be interesting for all of you to be aware of. So the first, the California Transportation Foundation provided an award to Sandag, the North County Transit District, and Caltrans. And this is recognizing our contractors, and we won the Transit Rail Project of the Year, and that's for the San Alejo Lagoon Double Track Project, which is part of the Build NCC program. And this project added about 1.5 miles of double track from Cardiff to the southern border of the San Alejo Lagoon, and it replaced a really old wooden trestle bridge that was in quite bad condition. So that's an exciting award to acknowledge the great work done by our teams. And then also on a similar front, Sandag and Caltrans won the Structure Project of the Year award. And you might recall the Gilman Drive bridge project, which just opened back in February of 2019. And this spans Interstate 5 and connects UC SD campus on both the east and the west sides of I-5. And then last but not least, we were also notified of some awards from the Women in Transportation Society San Diego Chapter Award, winning the Alternative Modes and Active Transportation Award for the Encinitas Coastal Rail Project. So that was really great, and that's recognizing a project that added a little over 1.5 miles of walking and biking trails, which was completed back in May of 2019, and that parallels the low sand tracks near San Alejo Avenue. And so we just wanted to acknowledge all the good work by staff and those that are partner agencies for the recognition from these awards. So, Madam Chair, that concludes the Executive Director's report. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Trainer. And all those awards just indicate that SANDAG is a very premier organization, and that the work product of our staff is reflected in those awards. So kudos to our staff as well. So with that, are there any public comments regarding Mr. Trainer's report on the Executive Director's report?
Thank you, Chair Salas. I do not see any hands raised at this time.
Okay, great. Are there any member comments related to this item? Okay, I don't see any requests to speak, and so we will move on to item number 3, and item number 3 is entitled "What We Are Learning from COVID-19 and How It Could Impact the Transportation Planning in the San Diego Region." So again, Mr. Trainer, you're on.
Thank you, Chair Salas, and members of each of the 3 committees, Regional Planning, Transportation, and Borders. Thank you so much for this opportunity. As I mentioned, a historic joint meeting, and we're quite pleased to be able to provide you with the most recent information that our team has been researching and preparing reports on about the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic, which has greatly affected many members of our community. And what we wanted to do today was to help provide an understanding of what we've been learning around the local region here, and to be able to help you understand the steps that we've been taking as we've been developing the regional vision, which we started more than 18 months ago, where we talked with you and the members of the Board of Directors about 5 strategies that we've called the 5 big moves. And as staff has been developing this new vision for our transportation future, we've been monitoring very closely the occurrences of the pandemic and the impacts that it's had both socially, economically, and we've also seen and observed and been trying to understand the equity and racial impacts, along with the impacts to travel in the San Diego region. One of the things that we wanted to point out is that once we moved into the stay-at-home orders and we started to see some significant effects on the transportation system, we started some localized research, conducting surveys with the region's employers. And this is helping us to try to understand questions around work from home and the telework phenomena that several members of our community have participated in. But we've also learned quite a bit about telework and where it's not occurring. And so we think that this is an important conversation that we're looking forward to your discussion about. Similarly, we've seen significant drops in travel, and we've reported over the last months, we've issued 3 bulletins about travel in the region on the region's freeways. And we wanted to talk a little bit about that, as well as the impact to our public transit system as well. And one of the things that we're attempting to do is, while we're continuing to develop the strategies around the regional vision, we're infusing the learnings and the lessons from this recent research and the observations that your staff have been making to make sure that our regional vision is relevant, that it's up to date, and it contains the most latest understanding of what it is that those members of the community are expecting and demanding in terms of a transportation system that's responsive to their needs, that satisfies the state and the federal requirements, and looks at issues around equity and justice and environment and congestion. And so with all of that, we've conducted surveys as well and had a very high response rate from members of the community, nearly 3,700 survey respondents. And so we think that we've got some really compelling information to be able to share with you. The panel that we've assembled is made up of both your SANDAG staff as well as the chief executives from both Metropolitan Transit System and the North County Transit District. So with that, I'd like to turn the presentation over to Elisa Arias, who runs your Coordinated and Integrated Transportation Planning Program.
Hi, Lisa.
Chair Salas, Chair Desmond, and Vice Chair Escobar, good morning, and good morning to all members of the committee. The focus of today's presentation is on what we're learning from COVID-19 and also what considerations we have for our planning work. As Ray mentioned, we started developing the vision for the 2021 regional plan about a year and a half ago in February of 2019, and we find ourselves in the middle of an evolving health crisis that has had significant impacts for our economy, our communities, and also for transportation. Next slide, please. We're still required to develop a long-range plan that has to be multimodal in nature and be able to be implemented with anticipated funding. And we also had to prepare an environmental impact report, both for adoption in fall of 2021. This slide provides some background or a refresher maybe on key provisions from state and federal laws that govern the development of regional plans. A compliant regional plan is necessary for our region to implement the projects that we're planning through corridor plans or CMCPs and also other studies. Regarding climate, SANDAG is required to abide by Senate Bill 375 and greenhouse gas emissions reductions, which for our region are a 19% reduction per capita in emissions from passenger vehicles compared to 2005 levels. Regarding air quality, the plan has to demonstrate that it meets federal air quality standards, which for our region are for ozone or smog, through a process that is called air quality conformity. And at the state level, AB 805 requires that the plan identify strategies to reduce air pollution exposure in disadvantaged communities. The regional plan must comply with Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, which prohibits discrimination. And in the 90s, the Executive Order on Environmental Justice also expanded it to low-income populations. Social equity is the shorthand term that we use at SANDAG for the overarching goal of achieving equity and environmental justice through our programs. Finally, Senate Bill 743 requires that transportation projects be analyzed for impacts through vehicle miles traveled as opposed to level of service. Next slide, please. So COVID-19 has had significant impacts on the economy, society, and travel, and we need to consider these impacts in the short term. However, our economy and travel will recover over time, and we are planning 30 years into the future or farther out for our children and grandchildren. During the stay-at-home orders, we saw almost empty roads and freeways, but traffic is going up now. Emissions from cars and trucks also went down, but now our air emissions are basically at the levels that we've seen in the last 5 years. We saw buses and trolleys with few riders, but transit ridership is going up, and many essential workers rely on public transportation to get to their jobs. Many people were able to telework, but there are many workers who have jobs that cannot be done from home. But we also saw more people biking and walking around the region. COVID has really emphasized the need for an equitable and adaptable transportation system that can respond to changes in the future. And the vision that will be shared with you in August seeks to create a more adaptive and responsive transportation system. This is an opportunity to plan the recovery with a focus on a more inclusive, sustainable, and resilient economy and society. We need a regional plan to continue bringing transportation dollars to the region to help with the economic recovery. And this is also a time for deliberate conversations and actions to lift low-income, Black, and Hispanic communities that have been most affected by this crisis. We have assembled a lot of timely data to share with you today to help in your policy decisions. Ray Major will focus on the economic and socioeconomic impacts of COVID-19 on our communities. Antoinette Meyer will present on how travel changed during the stay-home orders and now that the economy begins to reopen, the role that telework has played and what we can anticipate moving forward. And she will also discuss the challenges of access to internet and broadband for low-income and rural communities and disparities that has caused in distance learning and telehealth. And finally, how walking and biking have increased in our region in the past few months. Matt Tucker and Sharon Cooney will talk about the role of public transit during the crisis and also recovery strategies moving forward. So I'll turn it over to Ray Major now, who will discuss economic and socioeconomic impacts of COVID-19. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Elisa. There is no question that we are in the midst of an economic crisis right now. It's not the first time that we've been in an economic crisis this century. We had one back in the 2000s when we had the dot-com bubble, followed by the September 11 attacks, which completely changed the way that we travel, and it has lingering effects even today. Leading up to the Great Recession, if you remember, we had a housing market bubble, and when that popped, it led to a global financial crisis, a subprime mortgage crisis. There was an auto crisis. There were a lot of things that happened that were fallouts because of the housing market bubble. And it resulted in a Great Recession that we also got out of. We went for about 10 years of calm as the economy recovered, and there were new laws that were put in place that allowed us to have a financial system that was more secure and safe. And then we were hit by this COVID-19 virus in late 2019. And there's a recession now that follows that. It's too early right now to really tell what the complete impacts are going to be of this, but this crisis shall pass too. We just don't know when. So what we are doing here at Sandag right now is monitoring what is happening in terms of the economy in almost real time to give you, the decision makers, information to make better informed decisions. There are lots of different aspects that are being impacted right now by this current economic crisis. We see the local economy of all of the different cities within the region being impacted. We see people who work at those places being impacted. We also see communities being impacted. The impact is not even on everybody. There are different industries that are being hit harder. For instance, the tourism and entertainment industry. Small businesses are being hit harder. Not every race and ethnicity is hit the same way either. And so we're collecting this information, and I'm going to be sharing with you little snippets about the data that we have on many of these different aspects. So more than being a presentation that goes from A to B, what this presentation is going to be is kind of a snapshot of where we are with a lot of different economic indicators. Next slide. When we take a look at the San Diego region in 2018 and 2019, we had 4.1% and 2.6% growth in our gross regional product. This was really nice, and we had forecast that the economy was slowing a little bit. We would have had about 2.2% in 2020 and about 2% in 2021. But then COVID hit, and we have now a forecast of about a 7.1% decrease in gross regional product that we're predicting for the calendar year 2020. This basically wipes out all of the gains that we made in 2018 and 2019, and then maybe even more of the gains. Hopefully, there's a vaccine that is created, and we can bounce back in 2021. So we see that there would be an increase in 2021. The industries that are hit the hardest are restaurants, cafes, shopping centers, theme parks, museums, libraries, movie theaters, you know the list. They're hit by as much as 60 to 70% at one point within this lockdown, and right now their business is down by about 40 to 50%. These are businesses that don't necessarily hang together in one particular economic sector. The thing that they have in common is that they require close proximity of people for them to operate, and that's a completely different type of recession that we're going into in terms of the businesses that are hit than past recessions. This has also had a significant impact on our sales tax revenue. On average, we collect about $1.2 billion in taxable sales per year in the region, per month in the region, and what you see here is what's basically happened. March has been down 25%, in April sales tax were down about 44%, and May is down 35%. These are phenomenal numbers when you consider the fact that during the Great Recession we were down by about 9.1%. And so we're really losing a lot of sales tax revenue in these months while businesses are shut down. I'd like to cover a little bit about unemployment, which is an indicator that has hit hard, and we've been following this at Sandag. When you take a look at the population and the employment in the San Diego region, what you see, the blue line represents the civilian labor force. The orange line represents the number of people who are employed. And you can see from the graph that we peaked in terms of employment at about January 2007 when we went into the Great Recession. We lost about 100,000 jobs, and it took us about 76 months to recover those jobs. We were recovered by November of 13. And then you see the labor market continuing to increase, the number of employed people. The gap between the blue and the orange line roughly represents how many unemployed people are. It's the difference between the people who are in the labor force and the ones who have jobs. Take a look at what happened since January of 2020. We lost a tremendous number of people. We're back to employment levels now that we had in about 2006. But our labor force hasn't gone down that much. There are many more people in the San Diego region now who need jobs. So this is extremely devastating in terms of what's happened to the economy. Next slide. When we take a look at unemployment, on March 7th, before the COVID crisis really took hold and we started the lockdown, we had an average unemployment rate in the region of about 3.3%. There were some areas that had a higher unemployment rate, but on average, this is considered to be full employment. By May 9th, we had an average unemployment of 25%, with some areas being as high as 36%. You can see the center of the city of San Diego and down in the border regions, they were probably hit the hardest in terms of unemployment. By June 27th, we saw unemployment fall to about 14.3% as we started to open up the economy. However, by July 1st, we started to back off on that and we started to close down businesses again, so we would expect these numbers to start to go up again. Next slide. So what does that mean when we translate that into numbers? Pre-COVID, we had about 50 to 55,000 people who were unemployed in the region. Those are people really who are between jobs. Those are people who are entering the labor force. It's a healthy number of people to have unemployed in a region. But take a look at what happened in just a few months. We went up to an unemployed number of people of 425,000 people who had lost their jobs. And that only took like just 6 weeks to get there. And you see that the recovery has been slower. And even today, we have probably 250,000 people in the region who are still without a job and a way to support their families. I'd like to talk a little bit about how COVID-19 has impacted different economic sectors in the San Diego region. When you historically have looked at San Diego, and you've seen the slide on the left-hand side if you've watched any of the presentations over the last couple of years, we kind of divide the San Diego region into the driving sectors, which are tourism, innovation, and military, and you hear a lot about those in the news on a regular basis. There are supporting sectors, which are healthcare, education, and government, and they kind of grow with the population because they support the economy. And then you have what would be considered traditional sectors, which include retail, finance, insurance, and real estate, things like manufacturing, construction, and transportation. They represent about 42% of our economy. Well, our economy has historically been relatively resilient to recessions because when you see a recession and it occurs in the financial industry, for instance, or you hear about construction or manufacturing, employment being down, it impacts that 42%. But we had over 60% of our employment, or around 60%, that were in these recession-resilient areas. But COVID-19 has hit those areas too. So when you take a look at the industries that have been hit hard, they include tourism, retail, and transportation, which represent about a third of the employment within the region, or 31%. A moderate impact in healthcare, education, government, and manufacturing, which represent about 32% of the employment. And then comparatively low impact in the remaining sectors, which represent about 37% of our employment. So you can see that tourism, retail, and transportation have been hit the hardest, as indicated by the red on this graph. Next slide, please. When we track these different sectors, the driving and the supporting sectors, what you can see through the Great Recession is that we really didn't lose too much employment in those sectors. There was a little bit of bump or downward numbers of employees in the tourism sector, so that kind of, during the end of the Great Recession, so that kind of brought that blue line down. But you can see that they increased relatively well. The supporting sectors weren't really impacted at all by the Great Recession. Where we saw impact was in the traditional sectors. Our estimates based upon what's going on right now is that 2020 will finish with these lines basically mimicking what the dotted lines are showing here. So all of the sectors will be impacted. Supporting sectors will be down by several percentage points. The driving sectors will be down significantly because of what's happening in tourism, and the traditional sectors will also be impacted. Next slide. So when we take a look at how people are responding to this COVID lockdown in local industries and how much impact there has been, these graphs show some of the major sectors, and it shows how much business is down. What it represents, it's really looking at foot traffic, but this is a good indicator of the number of people who are going to these different establishments. And what you can see is that although there has been some recovery since the beginning of April, when that was kind of the bottom, you see that general retail is down by about 35%. Transportation is down 35 to 40% with the different sectors. Food and beverage, you see there's a little bit of a peak in grocery stores, but that was because people were purchasing goods and stocking up for in anticipation of the lockdown. But restaurants and bars, et cetera, are down between 25 and 45% in terms of their business. The only uptick in our economy really is in construction materials, where we see an increase of about 10 to 15% in traffic. And that's really due to a lot of people doing home improvement projects during this lockdown. If you've been to a Home Depot or you've been to a Lowe's on a weekend, it looks a lot more like SeaWorld or the zoo used to look in terms of the number of people in there than any other business that you might be looking at. Next slide, please. So who was hit the hardest? What type of businesses got hit by this COVID crisis? And it's really those people who are in high contact, high intensity occupations. And so one of the analyses that we did here at Sandag was to try to understand who is going to be most susceptible to really not being able to do their jobs because they had to have close contact with other people. Close contact is where you actually have to be within arm's length of a person. You have to be able to touch them in order to do the work. These included the industries of healthcare, education, transportation, food and beverage, and personal care services. These industries all were hit very hard at some time during this pandemic, and it represents about 24% of the employment in the region, or roughly 337,000 jobs. We also took a look at where frontline employees were. These are the people who are working in close contact with people on a regular basis, and we took a look at this from the lens of race and ethnicity to really try to understand who our frontline workers are. Frontline workers are kind of broken into two categories: non-essential and then essential, and the top part representing the non-essential workers versus the essential ones. And where you see the black line where there's the 1.0, what that would say is that the number of people who are in this particular industry would be, on average, from a race perspective, the same number that would be in the general economy. So if you were right at that line, that would mean that the distribution was even. What this shows is those industries or occupations that are overrepresented by certain ethnic groups within the region. And you can see, if you take a look at the right-hand side, that the Hispanic population and Black population, for the most part, are overrepresented when it comes to people working in essential frontline businesses as well as non-essential frontline businesses where they have close contact with people. Next, small businesses and how they're impacted within the San Diego region. We've gathered some data from the U.S. Census Bureau that has been collecting a weekly report on, they've been collecting a weekly survey on small businesses, and we really wanted to understand how small businesses are being impacted in the San Diego region. 95% of the businesses in San Diego are considered small. They have less than 500 employees, and about 50% of the workforce works in these businesses. When you take a look at change in revenue from week to week, you see that there are many more businesses that have had decreasing revenue week to week through this pandemic than have had increasing revenue. And this is concerning only in the sense that, yes, the businesses are open, but what this trend is showing is that they're not making as much money as they were making the year before, even the week before. And this is going to be concerning when you look at this from a long-term perspective in terms of being able to have these businesses stay afloat. When you take a look at the change in the number of paid employees, you also see something that's a little bit concerning, and that is that there's a continued number of businesses that are letting employees go. Even though there's been rehiring that's happening, there are people who, or businesses where we're seeing people being let go. Next slide, please. The survey also showed that there was a huge negative effect on most businesses. So the purple bars, if you look at those, 82% of the businesses reported having either a large or moderate negative impact, with only 15% saying there was little to no impact. There are some places or businesses that were not impacted as hard. For instance, the bicycle industry is doing tremendously well during this COVID lockdown, as is, for instance, the home repair industry and delivery services and things like Amazon. So there are some people who are benefiting from this, but the vast majority are not. The graph on the right shows what has happened in terms of requests for financial assistance from the government. And you see that 73% of the small businesses have applied for and received some type of PPP, and 25% have filed for economic injury disaster loans. Only 1 in 5 businesses did not ask for financial aid during this crisis. So what this really says is that 73% who've been receiving money, it's very important for them to continue to receive some type of help, because there is a large impact that is happening to these businesses, and this is what's helping them float through that. Next slide. How does this impact our taxable sales? Next slide, please. When we take a look at taxable sales, and this particular slide shows by calendar year what has happened since 1990, you see that taxable sales have increased. We had a moderate recession in 1991. Taxable sales were kind of flat during that time period. We had a mild recession in 2001, and you see that there was a little bit of a hiccup there in tax collection or taxable sales. And then you get to the Great Recession. And I think we all remember how bad the Great Recession was, and this is where we actually had a decrease in taxable sales, which would lead to a decrease in sales tax revenue. It took us 6.5 years to recover from this particular recession. The numbers are not all in yet for this COVID recession, but based upon the consensus forecast of major economic firms, we believe that we will be down about 13% in 2020, and that would be represented by that dotted line, and then we would come out of that sometime in 2021. And again, this is assuming that there's some type of vaccine that allows us to open up the economy again. So this is a very sharp downturn that we're feeling right now from this COVID crisis. Next slide, please. When we take a look at the impact on retail sales, who's getting hit hardest, and where does our tax revenue come from? About 50% of our tax revenue comes from business to business, and you can see that it's down significantly, down by 50%. Restaurant sales are down by 60 to 50%. This shows April and May data. And other retail is only down 8%, but that's because that includes the online business, and so they're doing relatively well. Auto repairs and auto sales are down because people are using fewer automobiles. Construction is doing okay in the region. Department store sales are down as they start to move online, but people also need less clothes. People don't need work clothes as much as they needed. Service stations are down by nearly 50% because people don't need as much fuel for the cars that they're not driving to their jobs. Apparel stores are also down by up to 82% in April. So these are the industries that are really getting hit the hardest. Food and liquor stores are down a little bit, but nothing compared to some of the other industries. How does this impact our communities? We took a look at where unemployment was the highest and how that correlated to the number of cases of COVID. This is the report that we put out a couple of weeks ago. And what this report really showed is when you take a look at the areas that had the highest unemployment, and that's the map on the left-hand side, you see the yellow areas that are really concentrated in the San Ysidro area, up into National City, into the Logan Heights area, College, that area. That's where we have the highest unemployment. The map on the right showed the number of COVID cases on that same day. And you can see the dark areas are where more of the COVID cases were. And then in the purple outline, we included the Cal and VirusScreen areas so that we could just see what the impact was on those communities that the state designated as needing help. And what you can see, and it doesn't take a data scientist to really see that there's probably a correlation between where COVID cases happen and where unemployment is. And so if you hit the next slide, what this shows are those communities that were really hit the hardest. So these are the 25% of the zip codes within our region that were hit the hardest in terms of both COVID and unemployment. And as you can see, most of them are south of the 8. Although everywhere in the community has been hit, these have been hit the hardest. Next slide. This slide takes a look at how COVID has impacted the different communities by race and ethnicity. Each one of these graphs shows unemployment rate on the vertical axis by zip code, and so the higher the unemployment rate, the higher the bubble would be. And in terms of COVID cases, that is represented on the horizontal axis. So if you have high unemployment and you have high COVID cases, you would fall into the upper right-hand quadrant. If you have a low number of COVID cases and low unemployment, you fall into the lower left-hand quadrant. So that's kind of how to read this graph. And what this shows, when we look at this by race and ethnicity, we saw that 44.9% of the Black community lives in an area that has high COVID and high unemployment. About 42% of the Hispanic community lives in an area with high unemployment and high COVID. This compared to only 14% for the white community. As you can see, 51.9% of the white community lives in areas that have low COVID and low unemployment. So there is some type of racial disparity when it comes to who's being hit the hardest by the COVID pandemic and the subsequent economic crisis that comes from it. Next slide. The conclusion of that particular report really shows that about 2/3 of the Black community and 70% of the Hispanic community live in areas that have higher than average unemployment. About 52% of the Black community and 49% of the Hispanic community live in areas that have higher than average COVID cases. When we look at that intersection, we see that about 45% of the Black community and 42% of the Hispanic community live in areas that have both high unemployment and high COVID. When you compare this to the white population, it's essentially saying that if you are a Black or Hispanic resident of San Diego, you're 3 to 4 times as likely to live in an area that has both high COVID and high unemployment. Next slide. So what does a potential recovery look like? We're monitoring a lot of different variables here at Sandag, and this is just a snapshot of some of the ones that we're taking a look at. We talk about unemployment and VMT all of the time. The interesting ones on here are the ones that seem to have not been hit or recovered. That include the home and garden equipment. You see those are the green lines. This shows the percentage, how far businesses dropped in these different sectors. But you take a look at airport, restaurant, and hotels. Those are the 3 bottom ones. And you see that they were hit extremely hard through this COVID crisis, and they continue to be hit hard. The reason that we monitor these separately is that these are really very much related to the tourism industry, which is one of those driving sectors here in the San Diego economy. Next slide, please. And my final slide really talks about what an economic recovery might look like. We spoke to the board at the beginning of this crisis and talked about doing the fact that we had done about 50 different scenarios in terms of forecasts depending upon how long the crisis was going to be and what type of recovery we might have. Well, the things that we can rule out now is that this is going to be any type of a short V recovery, that we would just bounce back from it. So right now, there are 2 there are two scenarios that we're kind of following. One is a moderate recession that has about a 4-month disruption, one with a long V recovery, and then one with more of a U-shaped recovery. The long V recovery would be one where we come up with a vaccine sometime in the fall, and we can get back to work in a normal time period. What that would really show is that we would end up coming back to baseline sometime in 2023. So there would still be a couple years of interruption here. And with a U-shaped recovery, one where we really can't figure out how to get all businesses open and it takes longer for us to come back to what would be the new normal, it could take until 2026 for the economy to recover to pre-COVID levels. The reason I put this up here, though, is that we will recover at some point. We will have a new norm, and we will need to have, as a planning agency, a transportation system that accommodates the people who come after we've recovered from this crisis. And so with that, I will hand it over to Antoinette to talk about the transportation aspects.
Thank you, Ray. Good morning, all. My name is Antoinette Meyer. I'm your Director of Mobility and Innovation here at SANDAG. So similar to the economy, the global pandemic completely disrupted transportation. After the stay-at-home order was put into place, transportation demand dropped to unprecedented levels, and our roads, our buses, our trains were all very quiet during March and April. We have been closely monitoring the impacts of COVID on travel behavior in our region and across the globe, and all of our data and research is showing that this is not likely a long-term change. As our communities start to open, transportation demand is rising and will continue to rise. And we're already seeing this in places like China and Europe, who are a little bit ahead of us in terms of recovery. You saw from Ray's presentation that the pandemic revealed disparities in terms of the health and the economic impacts, and the pandemic also shed light on inequities in transportation access and the ability for all communities to participate in remote work and distance learning. So I think this is an important consideration as we move forward with the 2021 regional plan. Next slide, please. I'm only briefly going to touch on transit ridership. We're fortunate to have both Sharon and Matt with us today, and they'll take a deeper dive into their agency's experiences and how they're planning for the future. But the chart on the slide shows the reduction in transit ridership across all of the services for each month starting back in March. Ridership dropped very sharply, reaching its lowest levels in April with a 70% reduction compared to that same period in 2019. Ridership has started to recover though, and we're seeing increases each month as restrictions ease. Next slide. Ray's presentation showed that minorities are overrepresented in those essential industries that require a high level of contact. And many of these essential workers are also folks that rely on transit to get to and from work. So 20% of people who take transit do not have access to a personal vehicle, and they experience much longer commute times than those who are driving to work. The median transit travel time is about 51 minutes, which is double the travel time for people who drive to work. They're also at far greater risk of having their livelihood impacted by any transit service level reductions that may be a result of COVID. So as we plan for a future transportation system with equal access to jobs and education and community resources, quality public transit that is fast and frequent is really vital to making those critical connections equitably. Next slide. In June, we conducted a regional travel survey to understand how people are traveling around the region during the health crisis and their plans for the future. The survey was distributed to 17,000 households that participated in our 2016 regional transportation study and had agreed to be contacted for future research and surveys. So as a quick reminder, that regional transportation study is a major survey that we conduct at least every 10 years, and the data is used to update our travel demand models that inform our planning and policy development. So between June 24th and July 1st, we had a 23% response rate with almost 3,800 surveys completed in just a week. So that's a pretty incredible response. The good news is that the survey results suggest that transit ridership will recover. So 42% of respondents reported that they used transit before COVID and will continue to take transit into the future. A significant predictor of pre-COVID public transit use was race, and African Americans were more likely to have used transit prior to COVID than other races. 36% said they didn't use transit before and they have no plans to in the future. An interesting finding, though, one that we weren't really expecting, is that 18% of people who responded did not use transit before, but stated that they would after a vaccine was found. And then only 4% of transit riders before COVID said that they would not be returning to transit. So I think this suggests that the fear of taking public transit may not be as profound as we expected, and that demand for transit will continue to rise. Matt and Sharon will talk more about all of the incredible work that their agencies are doing to make sure that transit service is clean and safe for both their employees and for transit riders. And I think that goes a long way to give public confidence in public transit. Next slide. So freeway travel levels also fell very sharply as a result of the stay-home order. The data on this slide is collected at hotspots on 8 major freeway corridors in the region. Traffic volumes reached their lowest also in April, with about 50% fewer vehicles on the road than during the same period in 2019. But as restrictions started easing, traffic steadily rebounded, and by early July, traffic volumes were only down by about 18% from the same period in 2019. Next. The reduction in driving also led to a reduction in VMT, and according to the California Air Resources Board, this translated to a noticeable drop in vehicle emissions and improved air quality in March and April. But as you can see on the slide, VMT on freeways is steadily on the rise, and the Air Resources Board reported that air pollution has returned to levels that are observed in recent years. As Elisa reminded us at the beginning of the presentation, we continue to have requirements for reducing VMT and GHG, so we still need to continue to develop a plan that accomplishes this. Next slide. We are a binational region, and our economic vitality depends upon the efficient movement of both goods and people across our borders, and many workers live in Baja and cross the border for work each day. Border crossings for both pedestrians and privately owned vehicles were down quite substantially. And the data in the slide is for our 3 border crossings, San Isidro, Otay, and Tecate. It does not include CBX. Restrictions for non-essential cross-border trips went into effect in late March and will be in place through August. Essential travelers are people who have visas or work permits, or citizens and residents that are returning for medical purposes, work, school, or official government business. Since schools have been closed, cross-border travelers are most likely essential workers or people who are coming across the border for healthcare. So April had the lowest number of crossings, but you'll see that in May, the crossings began to increase again. Next slide. Our regional travel survey asked people who owned a car if the amount they were driving had changed during the health crisis. And no surprise that 89% reported driving much less, but most don't expect this trend to continue, and they anticipate that they will be driving more over the next 6 months. Although many residents were driving less, they reported using online shopping and home delivery services more, and many of them expect to continue with this in the future. So while they're not driving their own car to the store, they're still generating trips in VMT with the delivery of goods and food to their home. The most common reason cited for driving less was not traveling to recreational and social activities, seeing friends and family. Less than half reported that they were driving less because they are teleworking, and about half of those who are teleworking said they expect to continue to telework at some level in the future. Next. We also interviewed 137 employers representing some of the largest companies in the region across a range of industries, from hospitality to healthcare to tech and governments. And the intent of the survey was to really understand the level of telework occurring during the health crisis and plans that employers had for telework in the future. More than half of the employers that we spoke with had employees teleworking, and only a quarter of those employees actually offered telework prior to COVID-19. So this was definitely a crash course in telework for many organizations. A quarter of those companies expect to offer telework in the future. Half said that they would not be offering telework in the future, and 28% are on the fence. So we're hoping that through our iCommute program, which helps employers with implementing telework programs and policies, we can move those maybes into the yes category. Next slide, please. So when asked about the percent of their workforce that would continue to telework, the most common response was less than 25%. And of those companies that said they would offer telework post-COVID, 9% said they would offer it full-time. The most common response, though, at 71% was to offer telework part-time, so 2 to 3 days a week. Next.
That's good, though.
We asked employers about what they perceived the benefits of telework to be. And interestingly, employee satisfaction, productivity, and helping the environment ranked higher than the cost savings from leasing commercial space. So that was a little bit of a surprise to us as well. Next slide. So setting telework targets is something we do for the regional plan, and I'll talk a little bit about that process in a few slides, but telework helps us to achieve our greenhouse gas reduction target. However, the telework targets that we set have to be backed by data in order to be accepted as reasonable and achievable by the regulatory agencies. So our assumption for the 2021 plan is that telework will grow much more than we've anticipated in the past, but we know that there are many occupations that can't be done from home. So to understand the potential for telework in the region and to help inform this target setting process, our senior consultant did an analysis of jobs that are conducive to telework in our region and found that 39% of all occupations in the region are considered home workable. This is a bit higher than the national average, which is 34%, but it's important to keep in mind that just because a job can be teleworked does not mean it will be. It's really at the employer's discretion to determine who gets to telework when and why. We also looked at the percent of jobs in our region that are considered essential. 64% of occupations are essential, and there's really fewer essential jobs that are conducive to telework. Next slide. One of the data sources that informed our analysis is a national study that came out in June from the University of Chicago's Booth School of Business. And one of the key findings from the study is that jobs that can be done at home are typically higher wage jobs in professional services. So jobs in finance or information-based jobs have some chance to continue with normalcy as they can be performed at home away from people. But just about everyone that works in hospitality or tourism, the sector that employs quite a few people in our region, or in other essential industries like agriculture or healthcare support and transportation, are much less likely to be done at home and tend to be lower wage jobs. Could you click, please? So the workers in these sectors are disproportionately hurt by the shutdown and the inability to work from home. And as I pointed out earlier, many of these workers rely on and need quality public transportation to get to their jobs. Next slide. The national data is pretty consistent with what we know about the typical teleworker in our region. So according to census data, in a normal environment, 80% of teleworkers in our region are white and over 30% earn more than $75,000 a year. Also, a common misperception is that teleworkers don't drive or generate VMT. So the data that we collect through our regional transportation study back in 2016, as well as national data, demonstrates that while teleworkers may not be contributing to peak period congestion, they tend to make many more discretionary trips for shopping and leisure and social purposes. So the National Household Travel Survey found that teleworkers took about 11% more non-work trips per day, and those trips were about 16% longer. And there's a number of possible reasons for this. One reason is that teleworkers are less likely to chain trips together with their commute, so running errands, dropping the kids off on their way to and from work. But it's also likely that teleworkers are taking advantage of free time to get out of the house, to socialize more, to recreate, and I think that many of us who have teleworked over the past few months can relate to that desire to get out of the house. Next slide. In terms of how we handle telework in regional plans, we've been setting pretty ambitious targets for telework since our very first regional transportation plan with a sustainable community strategy back in 2011. You'll see that our targets have changed over time, and this is based on data availability and recommendations that we've sought from third-party consultants and academic advisors who help provide validation of our targets to CARB. So the percentages represent the percent of the employed population in the region that can be found teleworking at least one day out of the week. When we started back in 2011, we had really very little data available on telework in our region. We relied on the census data, which reported that about 6% of the population worked from home, but they don't distinguish between teleworkers and home-based businesses. So since then, we have been conducting our own research on telework. We survey both employers and commuters on a much more regular basis, and we've adjusted our telework rates accordingly. Now, as we're planning for the 2021 regional plan, we're proposing rates that are much higher. We think this is achievable with more companies having experience with telework due to COVID and reporting that they'll continue with telework at some level into the future. These targets have been validated by our third-party academic advisor, which is the University of California Institute of Transportation Studies. And to help us reach these numbers, our iCommute program is in the process of designing a new telework program that will provide employers with both technical assistance and incentives for expanding telework in the future. So just to point out, the blue dotted lines running across the chart there is the baseline for permanent teleworkers and occasional teleworkers from our regional transportation study conducted back in 2016. Next slide. It's important to note, though, that achieving higher levels of telework will require broadband connectivity and quality home internet access. So COVID shed light on the digital divide in our region. 23% of low-income households lack a broadband subscription, and 20 to 40 students in many local districts lacked quality home internet access or devices that make distance learning possible. The digital divide between urban and rural communities is distinct, with less than half of the rural population having quality fixed internet versus 97% in our urban areas. So closing this digital divide is going to be an important part of our transportation planning to ensure that everyone in the region can benefit from improvements in transportation technology, app-enabled transportation services, as well as remote work, education, and healthcare. Next. So like telework, an area of transportation that saw a big increase was biking and walking. So 14% of respondents to our regional travel survey reported that they were biking more, and 50% are walking more, and most expect this to continue into the future. This is a trend that is receiving national attention, with bike shops running out of inventory and personal bike sales doubling in the US in March compared to the previous year. Next slide. The increase in biking was validated by the data that we collect from the 8 corridors where we have our eco counters. Each dot on the slide here represents the total number of bike trips in that corridor during May 2020. And overall, we saw a 91% increase in bicycle volumes compared to May 2019. Next. And the percentages there along the left show each count site's percent increase. You'll see there was a big increase up in North County, also the Bayshore Bikeway, and the little inset there is the urban bike corridors. Next slide. In May, we responded to local jurisdictions' need to create safer space for people to walk and bike and recreate, dine outside during the pandemic by creating our Shared Streets pilot program. We awarded 11 jurisdictions $95,000, and here's some pictures on the slide of some of the projects that have been put into place in El Cajon and National City and Encinitas. The feedback we're hearing about this program has been overwhelmingly positive, and there's a desire to continue with these efforts into the future and perhaps even transition some of these temporary measures to permanent solutions. Next. So before I hand it over to Matt, I just want to summarize some of the key takeaways that are top of mind for us as we move forward with the 2021 regional plan. COVID has demonstrated that telework is a powerful strategy for reducing peak period congestion and VMT. We have a long history of supporting telework in our agency through our iCommute program, and we will definitely be continuing more with this in the future. However, the research also raised awareness that it is a smallish percentage of the workforce that has the option to telework, and many employers will continue to expect and rely on their workforce being on site. The pandemic also emphasized the need for a more equitable transportation system, and the vision that we'll present to you in a couple of weeks really aims to fill gaps where they exist in the system today and address those access issues that especially impact our low-income and minority communities. The vision also proposes a transportation system that is adaptable. It uses technology to respond to changing demands so that we're better prepared for the unexpected in the future. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Matt. He's going to talk to you about what's going on at North County Transit District and what's happening nationally in the transit industry. Thank you.
Thank you, Antoinette. As Antoinette stated, I am going to focus more from a national perspective, at the same time giving a little bit of flavor how NCTD fits into the mix of what's happening from a national perspective in terms of the response to COVID-19. Can we go to the next slide, please? So as everyone is aware, COVID-19 has had a significant impact on transit ridership. Transit ridership and transit revenues are directly related. Just from a national point of view, it's important to note from an operating budget perspective, customer revenue accounts for about 36% of the funding source for all operating costs associated with transit operations. So when we talk about the impacts of COVID-19 and we talk about ridership, we also have to connect that on a national basis, that our largest source of funding of our operating costs are being significantly impacted. As you can see just by some of the names on the graphs, that this has, COVID-19 has impacts that are both national and international. Next slide, please. So you know, there has been a lot of panic, a lot of concern, lots of anxiety, questions being posed around, is this the end of transit? Is this the death knell? Is this the end of us going out to ball games? Is this the end of public gatherings? Are we going to ever get on an airplane again? Never having conferences in again? We all just need to take a deep breath. I know in terms of talking to my team, particularly early in the phase of COVID-19, we really needed to get everyone grounded and settled. This is a difficult time. We all need to take our breath and recognize this is a difficult time. We've gone through challenges before, and we will get through this challenge as well. But we need to be focused, as always, on what is our plan to carry us through it, and what are we going to be doing in the future to be more prosperous. Next slide. So you hear a whole lot of predictions, as I mentioned, and I just put this up there just for everyone to take a look at some of the more notable predictions that were wrong. It's difficult for anyone to tell anyone specifically what's going to happen in the future. Trust me, if I could tell you what would happen in the future, I would predict that I would not be in transit. I would be somewhere chilling. Next slide. So the key for us in transit and for our economy and across all industry is the vaccine, coming up with a vaccine that will allow us to resume our normal life. I know one of the concerns that we've had from an industry perspective was that there was a lot of fear mongering out there stating that public transit was the source of generation of massive outbreaks of COVID-19. The facts have not borne that out. I was sharing with some of my teammates this morning that if you look at like Hong Kong, for example, I believe it's a population of about 7.5 million people pre-COVID, about 12.5 million transit trips per day. And their infection rate of COVID-19 was actually below the rate of Kansas. And so there has not been a significant body of quantifiable evidence that relates public transit to the spreading of COVID-19. But this is just one of the concerns that we have from the industry point of view. And if you think about kind of the benchmarking discussions between public transit and taking an airplane, you would understand we would be concerned if we were comfortable with the notion of putting people in all seats on a plane, but saying that people could not get on public transit vehicles together. Next slide. So from an industry point of view, we have mobilized American Public Transit Association, that is our primary leading transit association, has developed a workforce, a task force to support the industry's response with 3 priority areas: communicating the transit narrative and rebuilding public confidence. So just think about that as we're taking in information in, from all different sources of information, whether it be the business community, whether it be the riding public, and trying to take that information in and making sure we're crafting a message back in response that gives people confidence. Another committee, Recovery and Restoration, that's a committee that I'm serving on, is really focused in on things like our cleaning practices, things that we can do from a quantifiable basis to make our systems safer and cleaner as we move forward. And then there's a committee that's focused in on transit leadership in the post-COVID-19 mobility landscape. So how do we come back even better? What are those things that we can do? What's been great about this is that APTA has supported the production of some key documents. For example, we have an industry cleaning standard document. I know we shared that with our board yesterday. We've had access to key subject matter experts from the Environmental Protection Administration, as well as the CDC, that has helped us to understand kind of what are going to be some of the benefits of the emerging technologies and different cleaning solutions that people are putting forward to us. So our work within APTA is continuing to move forward. We're anticipating a final report in the October timeframe, but it is a significant amount of work that is really helping the industry shape what our response would be. Next slide, please. So we're also working on a regional basis. It's important for you to know that. We've had our first kickoff meeting to really talk about in a more focused way in this region. How can we share information? How can we respond together? And from the early discussions, I've really seen a lot of collaboration between agencies, thinking about things that we can do, maybe even things we can potentially experiment with this, during this time period that could help us when things go back to normal. And so we are collaborating regionally because I think it's going to require both a national and a coordinated regional response as we want to attract people back to public transit. Next slide. So one of the bigger things that COVID-19 has obviously impacted is our funding. I think everyone is aware that transit received a significant amount of funding through the CARES Act. I will tell you that within our industry, there are a lot of agencies that are suffering and struggling at this point in time. If you go and do any Google research, you will see some agencies who've indicated that they have about 6 months of cash flow based upon the allocation of those CARES Act funding. And they are certainly looking for additional sources of funding to come forward. So part of what the national response and focus has been is let's look at infrastructure bills as a potential opportunity to help us rebound. Let's look at the reauthorization of the surface transportation bill. I know within the state of California, the California Transit Association is making a request, I think that's north of $3 billion to support the needs of transit agencies. So we are focused in on funding, and there's also an aspect of regulatory relief in terms of specific requirements that are set forth in state regulations. Obviously, given COVID-19, things related to some of our key performance metrics are going to be very challenging, if impossible, to achieve. We have largely received regulatory relief from a state point of view. We have gotten some regulatory relief from a federal point of view, and that has been extremely helpful. I know, speaking from an NCTD point of view, the CARES Act and having that funding provided to us before we finalized our fiscal year 21 budget, which began July 1, was instrumental in allowing us to be able to insert those dollars into our long-range forecast to understand what we would be able to do under varying different scenarios. So what I would say to you all as elected officials, it's really important, and I know everyone is in line requesting funding, but to the degree, whether in good times or bad times, that we can have financial certainty, it certainly helps us in our planning and being able to manage the ups and downs of the economy. Next slide. So we have also, from an industry point of view, again, been focused in on operator safety and vehicle cleaning practices. I know for both NCTD and MTS, we both are advancing the implementation of driver barriers. The picture that you see here is a partial barrier. We are advancing implementation of full barriers for our entire fleet. I know that the first phase of our project is anticipated to be completed at the end of September. What's critical about that is that that paves the way for us to go back to front door boarding of passengers so that we can begin collecting cash fares again. The picture to the right just shows a brand new clean bus, and that's going to have to become more of our standard of maintenance for buses to make sure they're as clean as possible. Early on in the process, I don't rule out the possibility of us even deploying people to clean in between runs on buses to make sure that we're doing as good of a job as possible to foster a safe environment. Next slide. So one of the another things from both an industry and NCTD point of view that we can be focused on is economic recovery and prosperity. I think everyone that participates in SANDAG is keenly aware of the importance of transportation in the economy, also is aware of the economic impact that transportation brings to our economy in terms of a return on investment. So one of the things the agencies have been able to do, depending on what their position is, but I can say for NCTD, absolutely yes, is that we've been focusing in on how can we advance more projects, getting more dollars out there to support our businesses, to support economic activity and growth. One of the other things that we're trying to do from a longer term point of view is to advance projects that will bring additional revenue sources to us. So this picture to the right that you see is a picture of Oceanside Transit Center. We've advanced a project to support the development of that site, plus our current site here at 810 Mission. And we're hoping to come to our board in September with a recommendation to award an exclusive negotiating agreement to a firm to support the development of that project. If all goes well, that project will result in significant public improvements. It will become essentially the mobility hub for North County, and NCTD will receive a brand new administrative building and support facilities at no cost to taxpayers. So one of the focuses is, let's get more money into the economy, let's advance projects, let's do all we can to support increasing our revenues. We shouldn't sit back at this time and not think about the future. If we plan for a less prosperous future, that's what we're going to achieve. If we plan for a more prosperous future, that's what we're more likely to achieve. Next slide. So one of the things I know, again, from a both national and local point of view is that we're focusing in on outreach and marketing. So we're advancing a number of surveys trying to capture information from the community. And then we want to make sure we start communicating back messages in response to that. So that's going to be a key piece of this, is getting surveys, talking to people, making sure that we're touching points across all economic strata, race and incomes, to make sure that we have a clear understanding from what the communities are telling us and what do we need to do and communicate back in response. Next slide. So another thing that we were already doing prior to COVID-19, but it's kind of reinforced, is updating our service plans, looking at new things that we could do to improve our service. You know, I will speak for North County Transit District that looking at our service, we don't offer the type of services in terms of frequencies as we sit today or pre-COVID-19 that really would put us in a position to strongly support transit services. If you think about it, like our Sprinter train operates every 30 minutes, and the standard should be for us to operate every 15 minutes at a minimum. If you look on our coaster services, we have gaps of more than 2 to 3 hours where there are no trains available. If you look at our bus system, with the average headway being right around 45 minutes to 60 minutes, of course, there are some routes that are 15 minutes, but those are not the standards that we want to be if we truly want to gain mode shift to support all of our local, regional, and statewide goals. Next slide, please. So we have continued to advance our plans. We've been working very closely in collaboration with SANDAG. And one of the actions today on the TC committee was to support the approval of commercial paper to the board, to the SANDAG board, to support the procurement of NCTD's 2 new sets of locomotive equipment. And what's important about that is that that will allow us to move from 22 trains per day to more than 42 trains per day on the coastal corridor. We've also been focused in on our bus system. That's the lion's share of our riders who are lower income ride our bus system. And one of the things that we want to do is to really speed up our buses and offer more frequent more frequent services. And one of the things I'm really happy about is working in collaboration with SANDAG. We received a grant that will support the study of our top 10 routes and looking at what we can do from a road perspective to improve the speed of those buses. I would also like to note that during this period of COVID-19, we've worked with our board to significantly advance the purchase of new buses. And this is a significant thing because literally a year ago, I could say that we had more than 50 buses that had reached the end of their useful life. And we'll be able to say by next year, mid next year, that we won't have any buses that have reached the end of their useful life. And we will be well into advancing our electric bus program as well as our hydrogen program. We're also advancing things like improved digital signage and implementing microtransit. That's been another partnership with SANDAG where we're looking to implement a significant phase beginning next year that would support both the city of Carlsbad and the city of San Marcos as the first areas. And then we would further expand that service as we are moving to more frequent buses on mainline routes and supporting that with microtransit and improved rail frequencies. So that's going to be a key theme for the industry, is how can we improve our services? And I think this is going to be the same case for MTS as well. Next slide. So one of the things that I think all of us have to do is in a leadership position is getting everyone again to think beyond how we're feeling today. This is a grumpy time period for sure. There's a high levels of anxiety. And what I've found is to the degree that we can give people something to focus on positively, something that they can create towards future prosperity, that you do help people focus their attention on what we can do to support our future. And as Sandag is keenly aware of, is that if we don't do a good job of planning for success today, we cannot expect to have success tomorrow. So I think it's really important for us to think beyond how we are feeling today to focus in on how we want to feel in the future. Next slide. That's it. So I'll turn it back over to Sharon.
Well, good morning, Chair Salas and members of the committees. Thank you for allowing us to come here to speak to you about what we're working on with COVID-related transit services. Next slide. Typically, I would begin my presentations with a lot of data, a lot of numbers, but instead I wanted to bring to you some stories and introduce you to some of our riders. Abraham is a manager of warehouse in East Village, downtown San Diego. He takes the Rapid 215 to work every day. He's been a transit rider for 4 years. Rosario has been a lifetime transit rider. She is a cashier at a produce market in Barrio Logan. She actually was one of the first riders on the Blue Line trolley when it opened in 1981. Marcecita is a resident of Southeast San Diego, longtime resident, and she has been taking transit for 5 years. Derek is enlisted in the Navy. He works at 32nd Street Naval Base, and he takes the Blue Line every day to get to work. Nora is a proud mom and housewife, homemaker. She actually takes the train twice a day and a bus to get down to San Isidro to do her shopping. And Jerry is a worker in the shipyard in National City. He commutes every day to work from his home in Valencia Park. These are the people, and amongst all of our passengers, why we want to ensure that we will be able to continue to provide safe and reliable transit services in the future. Next slide. So common amongst all of our riders is that they are very hardworking, trying to make ends meet. The median household income for our riders is less than $18,000 compared to the regional median, which is $75,000. They're making ends meet, they're contributing to the economy, and they're trying to earn a living every day for their families. Next slide. But one of the things that we must realize is that transit is essential to our economic recovery. Every dollar that you invest in public transit in MTS, in the MTS service area, will provide you with a $3 return on investment. And that's important because, as I said, these are very hardworking, low-paid folks that are taking transit. They're providing a disproportionate advantage or return to the region for what they're making in their salaries. So it's critical that you understand that our riders want to get back to work. They want to have a little extra money. And then on top of that, they play a significant role in the economic recovery of our region. Next slide. So this is just a ridership comparison for you. Overall, we're down 53% currently, but as this shows at our lowest on April 6th, we are steadily increasing as the economy opens up. Next slide. Bus ridership has been a little bit slower, but again, it's going up. Next slide. trolley is the one that is really showing the most increase. And this was to be anticipated because trolley is really, especially the blue line in the South Bay, is really the workhorse of our the backbone of our transit network. And this is starting to show in more crowded trains, et cetera. I think it's important to understand that as of now, we're taking about 113,000 passengers a day on all of our system, bus and rail. And that's down from about 280,000 a weekday previous to COVID, but still a significant number of people. Next slide. So as people return to work, we want them to feel confident that what they're going to face when they do come to the public transportation is a clean and safe way to transport themselves. So we're always going to continue to thoroughly clean our vehicles. I'm not going to get into a lot of the things regarding the disinfectants and things like that. Matt did an excellent job of discussing that. But one thing that I would like to say is that we are a little ahead of the curve because of this Hep A outbreak in recent years, because we had already been moving in the direction of sanitation and making sure our trolleys and buses were easy to clean. Next slide. So one of the things that our strategy is that we want to make sure that it's not just the passengers that are safe, but also our employees. These are the frontline essential workers that have been out there every day since the pandemic began. So we want to limit the interactions between our employees and the public. One of the ways to do that is the mandatory face coverings. That's something that we require. We also are looking at rear door boarding, as Matt had mentioned. One of the things that has really helped us is that we have now outfitted 340 of our fixed route buses, of our approximate 600 fixed route buses, with germ barriers for the operator. And it's interesting, they've been out there for 2 weeks so far, and we've regained enough in the fare box to pay for that. So it's important to us to get back to being able to take front door boarding for cash fare payments. Here at administration, we've been open since the beginning of the pandemic, and we are doing throughout our entire employee base, we are requiring thermometer checks. We have hand washing stations at all our main transit centers and our trolley stops. We're using disinfecting fog on our vehicles. You know, basically, we're just trying to make sure that the public feels safe and secure as they're moving about our system. One thing I would mention, as of end of June, we had only had 33 confirmed cases of COVID-19 amongst employees. And that's both the contractors on our system as well as our own in-house employees. And that's pretty good considering 2,600 employees service the system. Next slide. So these improvements haven't been done in a bubble. And again, Matt did an excellent job of talking about how the industry has been banding together to talk about this. One of the things that we at our agency started was a white paper that's a living document that allows us to kind of document what works, what doesn't work, the industry best practices, looking at our current policies, you know, where can we adjust in the short term, where can we begin to address in the long term. Next slide. So industry best practices aren't the only way that we need to look at this, though. We also need to look at what our passengers what will make them feel safe. And so we did a survey that allows us to look at what are the things that they care about. And it's not something that should be a surprise to you, but enforcement of face coverings and social distancing on board are the most important things. I want to highlight social distancing on board because unlike a lot of transit agencies in the nation, North America, and throughout the world, we didn't cut service significantly. We said we want to make sure we can maintain social distancing on board our vehicles. And so in April, we did a minor cut because we needed to make sure that we had enough drivers because of COVID-related attrition, so that we would be able to fill the service runs. But what we were able to do by June, end of June, was to actually go back to full pre-COVID levels of service. That's really important to the customers. They feel a little bit safer because they're farther away from one another and able to follow the CDC expectations for social distancing. Next slide. But unless passengers adhere to these practices, we're really going to fail in trying to address safety for our passengers. And so we do have a very elaborate communication program. Next week, we'll be handing out some facial coverings that are branded by MCS. We also will be handing out hand sanitizers. I will note that we have been handing out face masks for at least 6 weeks now on our station platforms to those who do not have face masks. We're thankful that we have been getting good supplies both by ourselves and our own procurements, but also through the Department of Transportation. We are asking our riders avoid conversations while riding, plug into your phone or whatever. And then we have a mobile app that's a way for you to avoid having to touch whether the fare box, a card, or the ticket vending machine. And that way, it's one less point of contact. And then we do have a text, we've always had a text function where you can text directly into our central control for security, and you can report if you feel there's an unsafe situation happening. If you want to learn more about the measures that we're taking, go ahead and get on to sdmcs.com and look at some of the videos we put together. Next slide. So next steps, we are doing a very elaborate campaign to try to get people to understand that it's going to be safe and clean to ride on our vehicles as they're ready to come back. We are monitoring our capacity and our passenger loads to the best way we can. But I will tell you, as an urban system that carries a lot of passengers and it's a critical piece of the economic recovery, we're not going to be able to maintain social distancing. You can't possibly buy enough vehicles to do that. So what we want to do is make sure that people understand how they can access in a safe manner, face masks, hand sanitation, et cetera. Another thing that we're looking at is we put together an innovations task force of 15 members of our staff from different departments, and their entire focus is how can we use innovation to help us move into the post-COVID or the next level of our services to try to draw back in passengers and to help them feel safe riding our system. One of the things we're looking at is real-time passenger loads, and this is a technology that we've already been playing around with. That's similar to when you go into a parking garage and you look and it says no spaces on this level, but then you can see that there's spaces on the next level. We'd like a situation where if a bus is arriving at a bus stop, a passenger can get on the app and say, oh, this one's loaded and I'm not comfortable getting on board, so I will wait for the next one because it looks like that one has space. These are the types of innovations that we would like to use to drive us into the next level. So in the end, we are doing everything to make sure that when people are ready to return, they will feel that they have a safe ride, and that we will be a critical part of the region's economic recovery. Thank you very much. The end.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the presentation. They were great from Tony Meyer, Ray, Matt Tucker, and Sharon. Thank you very much for sharing that information. So I'd like to ask if there's any public comments.
Thank you, Chair Salas. I do not see any hands raised for this item at this time.
Okay, are there any member comments?
Yes,
Sorry,
I have one if it's timely.
Okay, and I can't see who that is.
It's Dwight Worden, Delmar.
Oh, hi, Dwight.
Top of the morning. Really, my comment is a question, and it's maybe to Antoinette or Ray, and it has to do with the surveys that were done. Predicting what the population is going to do in the future is a hugely important part of us deciding how we're going to do our planning and how we're going to spend our money. And people that do surveying typically do either random sample surveys where you can extrapolate from the results of the people that respond to the larger community, or you do surveys that aren't random. And I think the ones that we're seeing here are not random. So for example, Antoinette told us 3,700 something people responded to a transit use survey. Can we really draw any conclusions from that about the broader 3 million population in San Diego because it wasn't designed as a random survey? Or are we stuck really just concluding that we know what those 3,700 people would do? And to me, this is an important issue on a lot of these data. How reliable are they for us when we make decisions to be extrapolated to the broader community? So I'll go back on mute and hope somebody can address that.
Okay. Is there any response to that?
Sure, I can go ahead and respond. And if our Director of Research is wanting to chime in, Cindy, feel free to also unmute yourself and respond. But you're correct. The surveys that we put out pretty quickly. We decided to go with the 17,000 households that participated in that regional transportation study. The response rate of almost 3,800 was very good, but we cannot generalize about the region at large because it was more of a survey of convenience as opposed to, a scientific representative survey. So we hope to continue to collect data and improve upon that, but we were anxious to get some data quickly on what was happening as a result of COVID and what people were expecting for the future, and that was the best way to do it.
Thank you for that answer. And I didn't mean to apply criticism. I'm greatly impressed by the information that you've collected and presented to us.
Thank you, Tessa. Are there any other hands up? Yes, how are you doing this morning?
Is it me?
Yes.
So something just struck me about when Sharon was talking about we don't take cash, and I know that's coming for everybody, and we check out apps. Does everybody have a phone, and does everybody have a credit card? And that would be kind of what what do you do if they don't?
Well, I didn't mean to imply that you can't pay cash. You definitely can pay cash. It's just that we're not forcing people to pay cash on the buses if they're only able to board in the back of the bus, because the fare box is only in the front of the bus. And so unless we put in a germ barrier on a bus, then we are having everybody board in the back. We foresee for the long term, we're always going to accept cash. It's just one of those things that there's a number of people who are unbanked. There are a number of people who just choose cash because that's the way they like to use. So we are offering an array of things for our customers to access transit using the fare box or Compass card or the actual phone. So.
Well, that answers what I'm primarily concerned about, because I'm one of those that I prefer to carry the cash. So anyway, thank you.
Mary?
Pastor Desmond.
Thank you, Mary. I appreciate it. See, a great presentation, lots of data. I appreciate that. Question for Ray Major. I think it was a slide 5. I don't know if you can put that up or not, but it's our regional economy is reopening up chart where you show a very optimistic, I think 2021, increase of 4.7. That's if we have, and I think you prefaced that with if we have a vaccine, which I'm hoping we do. Yeah, I don't know. I'm showing a slide 5 and.
Keep one more, please. Yeah, this one.
There you go. Yeah. So I think you prefaced this chart, we're at this minus 7.1, and then the 4.7 is if we have a vaccine. Do you have any clue if we don't get a vaccine by next year what that productivity or San Diego gross regional product numbers might be as opposed to that 4.7 of 2020? I mean, I hope it is, but I just kind of want to know what the other option is.
No, that's a great question. And so what we do is we take a look at about 10 leading economic forecasting houses, which is shown on another slide, including the Congressional Budget Office, et cetera. So we're looking at those forecasts as kind of the direction that things are going. And for the most part, there is an assumption in there that there is going to be some type of a vaccine and we can get back to normal. If we don't get back to normal, my professional opinion is that this could be 0 or it could be down again. In order for us to be able to increase in gross regional product, we have to open up the entire economy. So everybody needs to be able to go back to work. And as long as we have sectors of the economy that are closed, we're not going to be able to make these type of numbers. So it does look optimistic if there's no vaccine. And in that case, this forecast would need to be revised. So,
okay, I guess
I would say it could be as bad as flat if we didn't have the economy reopening.
All right, so I guess that kind of answers my question. Is that instead of this plus 4.7, it would be 0.
It could be 0 or it could be negative if we continue to have parts of the economy shut down. In order for us to have positive, I believe we would need to have the entire economy opened up again and people trying to get back to work with whatever the new normal is. But this is based on, like I said, it's based on these consensus forecasts that are coming out, from these various forecasting houses. The COVID virus vaccine is really the key to turning this around.
Okay, all right. So I just wanted, this was all based on having the vaccine, I guess. Start of 2021, apparently. Okay, and then I had a question for Antoinette on the teleworking, and I don't know, it's slide 38. I don't know if you can pull that up. On the teleworking market targets and regional plans, that you had a baseline there, and I don't know.
Can you advance a little bit, please? To the regional plan slide, it's a ways up.
It's number 38.
I think the number's different on the slides here. Keep going, please.
Do you know what number it is, Antoinette?
I don't off the top of my head. It says regional plan targets. Keep going.
Telework targets and regional plans.
There you go, number 44.
What's the baseline?
Yeah, so the data that we collected from the regional transportation study back in 2016 asked people about how frequently they teleworked. So if they were a permanent teleworker, they worked from home the majority of the time, or if they teleworked 1 or 2 days a week. So for permanent teleworkers, it's roughly 7%, and then occasional teleworkers more around 8%. So combined, about 15% of the population teleworks at least 1 day a week.
I guess I'm still confused. So I'm looking, so those baselines were taken at a different point in time? Or?
No. One baseline is for people who telework permanently. So they work from home all of the time. And the other is the occasional teleworker. So 7% being permanent teleworkers, around 8% are occasional teleworkers. This is from the same survey.
So then I guess there are these bars then? You've got, okay, in 2035 and 2050, those are then
those are targets. Yeah, those are targets, telework targets.
So in 2019, we actually went down in telework from 2015?
We did. So the data showed that telework hadn't grown much, but from the last regional plan, we had implemented through our iCommute program a telework pilot project, and we didn't get the participation from employers that we hoped. So we didn't see the growth in telework in that period, and our outside consultant that helps provide recommendations on telework suggested we lower our rates. So for the 2019 RTP, the rates came down from where they were in 2015.
Well, it looks good for 2021 on your proposed, though. Hopefully.
Yeah, yeah, and those have been validated, so we're good.
And then I guess just 3 slides ahead. This is on cycling on the rise. Did you present that slide?
Yes.
I mean, I don't know. I just kind of, I guess, towards the validity again of. I mean, it's nice to see we got 91% increase in bike riders, but that was from May versus May of this year versus May of last year. I mean, we had the lockdown this year, so a lot more people were home and, I don't know, home with their kids. So I don't know about, I mean, it's nice to see that 91%, but I think that time frame is a little skewed. That's all, just a comment on that, but okay. All right, thank you. Thanks, Mary.
Okay, thank you, Supervisor. And I understand that Councilmember Vivian Moreno has a question.
No, I don't have a question. I have statements. I was able to hear this item at yesterday's Sandag Regional Plan, the Community-Based Organization Working Group meeting. And I mentioned anytime that Mr. Major, Ms. Arias, and Ms. Meyer present, we know we're going to get very important information. Thank you also to the information that MTS and NCTD provided. I think it's clear that this information shows us that COVID-19 has impacted all of San Diego. Yet I think it's been a lot more devastating to our low-income Black and Brown communities. My entire district for the city of San Diego, which is District 8, is depicted in the map provided by Sandag, shows the communities that have been hurt the most by COVID-19, you know, and that's my entire district. My District 8 residents do not have the ability to work from home, therefore their likelihood of exposure is much more higher. Communities of color have higher unemployment rates as well as more COVID cases. And I think this highlights the need of our local agencies to focus on infrastructure improvements in our most vulnerable communities, especially if they are the backbone of our transportation agencies, as was mentioned by MTS. I think this pandemic has totally changed the way we see the world, and therefore, you know, changes must be made to the way Sandag and our transportation, how the way our transportation systems operate. I think these changes will start with the big 5 moves at Sandag, which are going to be a game changer for transportation equity in our region. And I would just encourage every panelist and audience member listening to advocate for your constituency and neighborhood needs to Sandag, MTS, and NCTD. And thank you again so much for showing this knowledge and for sharing this knowledge and for just putting this meeting together. This is very, very important information. That concludes my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Vivian. And I would just like to piggyback on something that you said, and that's related to, you know, communities that are impacted the most. And so I know when the CARES Act funding came down, that the city of San Diego received direct funding so that they had the ability to allocate the monies where they best saw fit. However, in the smaller communities, Chula Vista included, is that the CARES Act money came through the Board of Supervisors, and it was allocated to communities based on a per capita and not where it was most needed. And I think that in the future, if any of that funding comes down again, there has to be a more fair and equitable way of distributing it. I think it was really unfortunate that communities that were not as impacted by the COVID epidemic and those in South County received the same amount of money per capita that communities less affected were. So there has to be a different formula for distribution of monies, and that's just my editorial comment. And I know that hopefully in the future that can change. Tessa, do we have any other member comments?
I'm just going to make a brief comment, if I may, Mayor.
Oh, yeah. Hi, Kristen.
It's fine. I agree with you on the allocation of the funding that's coming through the county. I mean, I look at your community, I look at El Cajon in the East County, and National City. You can just look at the map. And I was also going to say I had a few questions, but in the sense of time, I'll give them to staff. They mostly have to do with factoring in business closures due to COVID, unemployment, how that affects our financial recovery, but I will send them in an email because I know we're running short of time. I'm just giving Ray the heads up that they're coming. And I agree with your comment on how to distribute that CARES money.
Okay, thank you very much. And Councilmember Ward.
Thank you, Chair Salas, and thank you for a lot of information and presentation. For staff, I wonder kind of going forward if you can maybe take the analysis to the next level when we talk about telework and possibly from the survey results, the number of employees, and then how do you make that next leap to the number of employee trips, which translates into VMT, which from there we could probably start to calculate maybe greenhouse gas emissions or other maybe economic savings from the need to be able to maintain or otherwise provide other kinds of more immediate investments, prolonging the timeframes and just sort of changing the landscape. I wonder how one feeds into the other for every percent addition that we are able to incentivize telework. That might inform us then some subsequent decisions as well in our transportation planning. And then I'm also curious to dig a little deeper, probably another time because we're out of time, about some of through iCommute, what some of those specific incentive programs might look like for telework. Thank you.
In terms of doing the next level of analysis, the data that we have on telecommuting goes into the transportation model, which is really where we would be able to calculate those other impacts that you're talking about, like, for instance, the reduction in VMT and greenhouse gases. And as Antoinette mentioned, there's a longer trip that is associated with people who are telecommuting. So these nuances really need to be worked out in the model. We can't really do it in the back of the napkin, but that is a variable that is in the model itself, and so we'll be able to tease out of the data what type of impact telework has on our transportation plan and subsequently VMT and GHG. But those calculations are done after the model is run, so we will be taking that into account.
And we're also happy to come back and get you more information about the iCommute program.
Thank you. Anything else, Mr. Ward?
Chair comment?
Oh, yes, please.
Thank you. I had a couple questions, but I know it's 12, so I'll limit my question to one, and it's for Mr. Major. Mr. Major, unemployment stimulus monies, which is roughly 600 additional, will be ending come July 31st. And I did see your chart on a significant amount of unemployment south of 8, specifically the southern corridor. Very similar, my district is very similar to Greg Cox, that I represent the Southern District within Imperial County. When you couple the ending of the unemployment stimulus and the potential for a Mexican financial crisis, and obviously both Imperial County, Southern Imperial County, and Southern San Diego County depend significantly on cross-border traffic and cross-border financial stimulus. Would that potentially, from a regional perspective, create a much wider U in a recovery?
Well, it will definitely have some type of impact, because what we learned from the stimulus money that has been received to date, a lot of that money is being spent on taxable retail sales, for instance. So it's spent on rent, but it's spent on food also and other things. So you take that money away, there will be fewer dollars in the economy that really can be supporting all the economic activity. So it would definitely have an impact. There's also an impact in terms of the cross-border trade. I mean, right now we still have restrictions in place in terms of people being able to come across the border. So yes, if we stop having these stimulus checks come, I think you will see a decrease in taxable retail sales and subsequently in the tax revenue that agencies like Sandag receive.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, I see that Mayor Alejandra Sotelo Solis also has a question or comment. You're muted, Ale. You're muted. Can you unmute Alejandra? I'm still not hearing her. Tessa, is there a way to unmute Alejandra?
We show her as unmuted. Mayor, are you self-muted by any chance?
Well, I'm not muted. Ale, check your computer.
I think we're having some audio problems. Mayor, if you could exit and come back in, it'll probably fix it. You're not self-muted. You are unmuted. It's an issue.
So, Mayor Sotelo Solis, if you want to exit and then rejoin on that link, and then we'll look for you again. And Chair Salas, Councilmember Monica Montgomery has indicated that she also would like to make comments. Production will need to promote her to a panelist position. She's currently on the attendee side.
Okay, is that a gap in time? There you are.
Actually, hello, Mayor. Hello, everyone. I'm actually here, so yes, thank you. I was promoted again. I had quite a bit of confusion this morning. That's my fault. So, I don't have much to say. The statistics are definitely affecting my community, as Councilmember Moreno indicated. We're kind of in the same or similar boat with the zip codes that are most impacted by COVID-19 in all areas: transportation, unemployment, case rates. And so, you know, I am in the stage of trying to figure out what very real solutions can be set in place now, whether on a broad level that be some type of expansive job training for people who may never be able to go back to their previous job. And there are just so many things that we have to think about now. As the county just indicated, the testing will go down. That is not good for my community. We have a testing center at Tubman Chavez that has a line wrapped around it very early in the morning because it is a walk-in site. So I'll just be on one end working to fight for the things that we already have, and then to expand that to meet the needs of the people, which is extremely hard right now with limited resources. There was one slide that showed it did split the populations into the Latino population, the Black population, Asian and white, and the impact of where people lived, where cases were extremely high and where unemployment was extremely high. And I think that really says a whole lot about what we're dealing with right now. The data I think is going to be similar because we were already dealing with these disparities pre-COVID-19. They've just exacerbated them. So I'm really looking at solutions at this point because the data is probably for members of my community going to stay the same and get worse. So I truly appreciate giving us this perspective so that we can be reminded of all the work that we have to do. And I think that in addition to that, I would really like everyone to take this in, not just those of us that represent these communities, but we all have to answer for this disparity. And I think it takes a collective effort for us to recognize it and get the resources where they need to be, so that these numbers don't look like this anymore. So that's all I have to say, but thank you, everyone. And thank you, Sandra, so much for all of this.
Yes, thank you so much, Ms. Montgomery. And let's see, I see we have Mayor Alejandra Sotelo Solis back.
Right. Hi, everyone. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right. So again, I want to echo the sentiments of my colleague, Councilmember Montgomery, Councilmember Moreno, and well, Alicio and Salas, with regards to really thinking about equity, with regards to the impact of what COVID-19 has done to those communities, like many in the South Bay, that have been exacerbated because of comorbidities like diabetes, like asthma, like heart disease, that that when we talk about transportation as a whole, it's not just getting on the bus, but it's all of those other elements and environmental injustices on top of economic challenges that really play a role. And we're all trying to change that a little bit at a time, and recognizing that COVID-19 has just added much more weight on all of our shoulders regarding addressing those inequities. But I wanted to just thank MTS and for presenting the faces of those in our community among the Blue Line that are the people that are using the Blue Line and who are the backbone of the response and the safety and providing all the essential services that have been needed and life-saving for many people in our community. So again, thank you to MTS staff, thank you to our CEO for presenting that. And as a representative of Sandag, I'm very happy to see that all of the entities, North County Transit as well, and even the Baja region is being discussed, because we truly are a region. We see the frontera, we see the border, but we see it differently than people who have never visited from other parts of the country, including DC. So I think we are in a very unique position to share the highlights of our partnerships and ongoing dialogues, that we are one space, and whether it be pollution, whether it be traffic, whether it be homelessness or COVID-19, we all have to work together to find solutions. So thank you again, Madam Chair, for the opportunity, and thank you again for all of the presentations provided to us.
Thank you very much. I don't see any other hands. So Tessa, do you see any hands from your side? Any other questions or comments?
No, Chair, I do not see any further hands raised at this time.
Okay, so this is a discussion item and no committee action is required. Again, thank you for the excellent presentations and the information. I'm sure it'll take us a long way in adapting our regional plan to current and future conditions. And just to tell Matt Tucker, I really liked your optimism and your attitude, and I think that we all have to understand that there will be brighter days ahead. So that concludes item number 3, and agenda item number 4 is continued public comments. Tessa, do we have any comments that you see?
I do not see any raised hands for this item.
Okay, thank you very much. So that concludes our meeting for today, and we will adjourn to the next Regional Planning Committee scheduled for Friday, August the 7th at 9 a.m. And thank you very much for attending and your attention.
Thank you.